Lesson three.
Lesson 3.
Lesson three. Who are we talking about?
We're talking about Enoch.
Enoch. Dude, I'll tell you what. That has to be one of the men that I wish we just had more on. I know Joseph gives us some. I know that we get some from various books of Enoch, but man, there's some stuff there, right? Especially as Mormons. I think because we know that Melchizedek had a successful society, and there's been some speculation that his city was taken up, right? We don't know that for certain, but they're just there and then they're gone.
I like the way that Joseph Smith translation reads with him. It says that they sought the city of Enoch, and it says that they did obtain heaven, as well. It does.
Yep. But Enoch and his city, we know for certain got there. And maybe this is just the surveyor / planner in me, but I would love to know what the ordinances of that city were, right? Not ordinances in terms of like temple ordinances, but how was the city governed?
Yeah, the civil laws, all that. Yeah. Unfortunately, the extra canonical, non-biblical books of Enoch don't really go into the city aspect because
Right.
this is not there. But hopefully we can kind of derive some of elements. The name Enoch, on a thought, I was just barely looking that up. It seems like the name Enoch means initiated, dedicated, or inaugurated. But I vaguely remember that Hunib also means it meant consecrated. So even the name for Enoch meant consecrated. So it's interesting that he is the ideal for consecration.
Right, which actually, as you said, that does lend itself to the belief in certain ordinances, making a man dedicated or consecrated, initiated, right? Those are all things as Mormons we should be very familiar with, especially if we're familiar with temple liturgy and those sorts of things.
Dude, temple liturgies everywhere. We've been going through that in our lessons, right? Like all the early Christian scriptures, the Adamic stuff, the Adam literature. It's got all the ordinances spelled out practically right through there.
Interesting. So yeah, I'm geeked up for this one.
Yeah, it's going to be a good one. So we left off with last time kind of with the idea that the pearl of great price is the answer to Nephi's conundrum, that the plain and precious or things were removed, or even covenants of the Lord are removed. So not necessarily plain and precious, but when the angel's showing him in 1 Nephi 13, and he sees the book that'll come forth among the Gentiles and then to his people, the angel tells him it was complete, but then it's been taken apart. And Nephi remarks that it contained the covenants of the Lord, only there were not so many.
Right.
So the Bible didn't even have as many as the brass plates had. Right. Hugh Nibley says the pearl of great price is the only thing that restores what was lost from the Bible, because the Book of Mormon does not restore what was lost from the Bible. Right. And so we're kind of dealing with that more in that sphere this time, for sure. Whether it's what we're getting from Joseph Smith, but we're also going to dive into the books of Enoch too.
Okay.
As well.
Nice. Well, dude, let's tear in.
All right. We'll take a look at what's in our pearl of great price first.
Do you need a set of scriptures or anything?
I don't. I mean, I got it on my phone. If besides my notes here. At the end of where things are kind of moving along after Cain kills Abel, it says that Adam was blessed and the gospel was preached. All things were confirmed unto Adam, it says, by a holy ordinance, and the gospel preached in a decree sent forth that it should be in the world until the end thereof, and thus it was. And Adam hearkened unto the voice of God and called upon his sons to repent. And Adam knew his wife again, and she bare a son and called his name Seth. And Adam glorified the name of God, for he said, God hath appointed me another seed instead of Abel, whom Cain slew. So that's important because in the class, I don't think we covered it in the podcast, but in the class I was showing the early Adam literature where Michael the archangel is sent by God to go talk to Adam after Cain kills Abel, and he says, don't reveal the mysteries to Cain.
Right.
You will have another heir. Because that was kind of the contention, right?
Right.
As we discovered, that Cain wanted to be the patriarch over the priesthood. And so that fits. Although, squinting at it, you kind of got to say, oh, Cain already had the ordinances to be where he was.
Right.
But nonetheless, that element is in that liturgy, or that scripture is interesting. Um,
How
Adam's told that he'd have another heir.
how do you square that with the Adam God doctrine, right? Because you have Michael coming to talk to Adam. In LDS theology, Michael is Adam.
So
Are you thinking more offices here as well?
I don't know if we need to go into offices. I think in our world, offices is the typical explanation, and that's fine. But I think, in the lessons, I really went into like the linguistic approach to like the names of God being, as a different approach for identities of the personages. In this instance, though, so we covered the Adam literature and like the discourse on Abaton and stuff where the Jews have, you know, like the what was it called? The divine investiture of Michael. That was
Right.
crazy, right?
Yep.
Where you have you see the figures of both Michael and Adam, though they are separate in that
Right.
framework, they're both being exalted to basically the identical position.
Yeah.
And you and I are squinting at it and reading in between the lines and like, what's really going on here?
Right.
Right? Is it that they were viewed as separate, or maybe some people really had the esoteric knowledge that they were the same, but they were kind of bound in the culture to put it into different terms. But as I've been reading the Books of Enoch stuff, I have a new approach.
Really?
Yeah,
That's
to
interesting.
actually
Okay.
answer
Well,
your
I'm sure
question.
we'll get there then.
No, we can go to it now.
Okay.
The the Jews and the Christians got rid of the idea of a pre-existence,
Right.
but for a while it existed among both groups. In fact, I want to say the Jews actually had it longer. That might be not true, um, but both originally believed in that. And as an outgrowth of a belief in a pre-existence, is that we exist as
Right.
our own entity before we came here. I think we see, as I've been studying the books of Enoch and stuff like that, is we have heavenly counterparts.
Okay.
And so not only were they viewed as, oh, that was me before this now, but like I still exist there.
Oh, okay. Oh, interesting.
Yeah. And so that you could be seeing some of that element. Like
Fascinating.
yeah, Enoch has his heavenly counterparts in these stories.
Okay.
And it's kind of veiled. Like at one sense, he's seeing the Son of Man, which we're like, oh, that's Christ. And in some instances, when he's interacting with the Son of Man in heaven, because Enoch's being brought into heaven, it's like, oh yeah, that's a separate personage, but then it like starts blending. Like Enoch
Mm,
is the Son of Man, and the Son of Man is his heavenly identity or counterpart.
interesting.
Yeah, it's weird. And but that's one approach.
Okay.
That's just the way that they looked at things.
Right.
But I almost want to write a scholarly paper that, uh, for example, on the Adam God doctrine in light of what the scholars would term Second Temple Judaism. Are you
Right.
familiar with what that
Yep.
term means? Right. So the Second Temple, and we'll talk more about that, is the period between 500-ish AD when they rebuilt the temple after the Babylonian
Right.
captivity and Christ. Right. And so that's that era, which is the better documented era of Judaism, right? But like all the literature from that point, to me, when I look at that, Michael the Archangel is nigh unto God, if not viewed as God in that
Right.
literature. And it's because the Greek philosophy at the time was, when people think of Greeks, they think of like Greek mythology and like, oh, you got
Right.
Zeus in the pantheon, and you got, as Hugh Nibley puts it, like you got the nightlife of the gods, and there's booze in it, and
Right.
sling, hanging around, and sometimes they're violent. They like to fight, the
Right.
competitions. And so Greek philosophy is different though, and so it's actually monotheism. The philosophical monotheist God idea in Greek theology was kind of almost and it permeated the rest of the world, but it was the outgrowth of the idea is there can really only be one God, because if there was more than one, they'd do all this and then there'd be just chaos, and they'd be competing and fighting, and there can only be one. And that one would have to be all powerful. And so
Right.
that's the ideology that then permeates into Judaism and Christianity. But it's also the attached ideas of he can't have a body,
Right.
and you can't know him, and therefore God gets removed, and now he has to have intercessors between himself and
Mm,
humanity. And Michael the archangel and there are other archangels, but Michael is always kind of the lead.
The chief.
Yeah, he's
Yep.
the chief. And so he is essentially taking on the role of God because God's been removed in all that
Right.
context. So I find that fascinating.
That is fascinating.
Anyway, that's a tangent right off the bat. Um, Back to the Pearl of Great Price. This is like if I have a pet doctrine, what we're about to get into here is my pet doctrine.
All right. I like it.
And so I hope I can do this well. We see in Moses chapter 6 that it says, and a book of remembrance was kept, in the which was recorded in the language of Adam, for it was given unto as many as called upon God to write by the spirit of inspiration. And by them their children were taught to read and write, having a language which was pure and undefiled. Now this same priesthood which was in the beginning shall be in the end of the world also. Now this prophecy Adam spake, as he was moved upon by the Holy Ghost. I think all those are tied together.
Okay.
That the priesthood that Adam is talking about, he's making a prophecy. Now this same priesthood, which was that a book of remembrance was kept, recorded, and given unto as many as called upon God to write by the spirit of inspiration, and their children were taught to read and write, having a language which was pure and undefiled. When you set the terms, define things in the society of Babylon around you can't define things. You can see the benefit that your children would have.
Yep.
Right, from that teaching,
Absolutely.
learning out of those books, right? But writing by the spirit of inspiration is super interesting. We're gonna the Books of Enoch itself, these pseudepigraphal books, really fall in line with this concept, and we can get into that in a minute. But Adam says that this priesthood will be in the end of the world also, that you will write by the spirit of inspiration. Isn't that fascinating?
In the hereafter?
It says that this priesthood, which was in the beginning, what they're operating on, which I believe is having to do with the records and writing by inspiration, writing scripture, shall be in the end of the world also, which is okay. Let's say the latter days.
Okay.
The end of the world also.
Interesting.
And contingent with that was, it says, and a genealogy was kept of the children of God. And then this was the book of the generations of Adam. Okay. And it goes forth. And so those two ideas are intertwined, but they're a little different. So the genealogy, but also writing scripture.
Right.
Parables or proverbs or
gotcha.
Revelation.
Okay.
What, you know.
All right.
So let's get into Enoch, the books of Enoch. So Enoch, the figure that we're aware of, the seventh from Adam, he would have lived approximately 5,400 years ago.
Right.
The books of Enoch that we have were written between 200 and 300 years from Christ.
Okay.
So did Enoch write them?
Probably not.
From that viewpoint, no, he didn't, right? And so you have other people, not Enoch, writing by the spirit of inspiration, as Adam is saying, and they're writing these books, they're writing these scripture, and the parallels are dead on with what Joseph Smith is getting. He's doing the same thing. He's my view on the Pearl of Great Price, you know, we call it the Genesis, right? Or the Book of Moses. But I like how Hugh Nibley kind of breaks it down. He says, well, really, we have a book of Moses, we have a book of Adam, we have a book of Enoch, book of Noah, and even with Joseph Smith Matthew, we have the restored words of Christ.
Right.
So we have all these different authors. What Joseph Smith is doing is he's channeling this idea, and not that he's reproducing the whole book of Adam, the whole book of Enoch, the whole book of Noah, but he's taking the fragments of those and he's splicing it back into Genesis.
Right. So
he's making an inspired version of Genesis because it's an amalgamation, like Mormon does with the abridging all the plates.
This is going to be interesting, right? Because if Joseph's getting stuff on Enoch, we need to pay attention to Enoch. There is something there that, and it's been my contention for a while, that we haven't given Enoch his due, right? I think because there are different books of Enoch, it does create a bit of a conundrum for us to wrap our mind around, right? You have the Ethiopian one, you have a couple other translations, and then you have Joseph Smith stuff. I think, okay, let me phrase this. For a guy like me who's super lazy, just going with Joseph, like that newest is, is good enough. It creates an opportunity to do that, but I don't think we do him justice as what the Lord's trying to get across without going to this.
Right, and so we can view through the latter day restoration that obviously what we get through Joseph Smith is going to be a lot more authentic.
Right.
First off, right, and so the question becomes when we read this older stuff that's produced by a source that we don't know about, what's authentic, what's not,
Right.
and we just got to compare notes.
Yep.
At that point.
And I'll say on the outset here, there's a lot of bullseyes, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I covered this with a guy named Adam Stokes. There's no way Joseph would have had a manuscript of the Book of Enoch. Just wouldn't. We know that there was a copy out in France at this time during Joseph Smith's lifetime. But Joseph was having a hard enough time writing English. I don't think he was necessarily diving into the French, right?
No.
So the fact he does hit all those bullseyes, that should stand as a testimony.
To this day, there's modern scholars who say that Joseph Smith had to have had access because there's no other way. And they say that there's no other way that he could have.
And then when you pin him down and say, okay, but where's he getting it? They're like, well, I don't know.
Some other fragment that we don't know about is what they'll say.
Right, exactly.
Yeah.
And so when the best you got as a trained historian is some other fragment we don't know about, I tend to call BS because look, we have a pretty good idea of what folks were reading in those days, right?
Well, okay, so
it's not a mystery.
Here's one rebuttal to this too. Enoch was not popular.
No.
In the Christian world and the Jewish world at this point in time, and for a long time before that, the reason why the scholarship was sleeping on it, like why there was one copy in French in France, was because no one wanted to touch it, and it was locked away, and you had to go through hell to even go see it. It was because it wasn't of interest to anyone. So to take the viewpoint that Joseph Smith was just aspiring and a charlatan or opportunistic, whatever, he would have been working in the framework of what are my audience going to be? What are they interested in? What can I capitalize?
Right.
Enoch's not the thing to capitalize on because no one gives a care.
No, because realistically, in the Old and New Testaments, he's mentioned a handful of times, right? It's not like, and if you go back to Enoch, you see this, right? It's not that. They're short, quick blurbs, and there's maybe a handful of them.
Yeah, all the scholars who had looked at the Book of Enoch at the point of Joseph Smith hated it because of all the astronomical stuff in it, all the cosmological stuff. And like that, they said this has no bearing in the gospel. This is just rubbish.
Right. Absolutely. And it's interesting that it is referred to in the Bible, but does not make its way into the canon, right? And this is where I take exception with sectarian Christianity, right? When they say that the Bible is the inerrant word of God, I'm like, bro, that thing was created for a political purpose. Let's not pretend that this was done because various bishops got together and said, boy, we really need to unify things. No, Constantine was looking for a one religion that he could rally the troops behind.
Yep.
And it was political. And Enoch throws curveballs all the way through, right? Like it does not fit with a Trinitarian view of God. It doesn't fit with a God who cannot be known. It is troublesome.
Yeah, all the way around it is. And so yeah, Joseph Smith would not have copied Enoch for any benefit at that point in time.
No. And I don't think there's a ton of French converts running around in those days either, right? Like
no, there weren't.
If you try to just pin down where, let's just take the scholarly consensus and say, okay, if he did have a fragment, where's that fragment coming from? Well, they're not tearing the French out of France to come join the Mormons, right? That's not happening. It hadn't been translated at that point in
and
English.
Then the next fragment we got was from like the Orthodox side of things, and that wasn't definitely not American.
No.
Eastern Europe.
No. So there's this, like, if you ever want to get into a debate with someone and prove Joseph Smith more than a charlatan or a fake, Enoch's your boy. You're
Oh,
gonna
yeah.
want to pay attention to Enoch.
Oh, dude, you're gonna love this one. All right, but let's continue with the Pearl of Great Price before we get into the Books of Enoch. Um, Hugh Nibley says in Enoch the Prophet, it all begins on earth with the book of the generations of Adam, a complete record of names and events and of God's dealings with his children on the earth. He requires the saints in every age to keep such a book, or rather to continue the original, adding their own names and histories to it, as they arrange by lot the inheritances of the saints whose names are found, and the names of their fathers, and of their children enrolled in the book of the law of God. That's section 85, which is the same as the book of remembrance, which is also section 85. So that's your one mighty and strong
Right.
section, right? Which goes back to Adam and is also the genealogy of the sons of Adam. Enoch reads from the books to remind his people of the commandments which I, God, gave unto their father Adam. That's Moses 6:28. When he called upon our father Adam by his own voice and ordered them to pass it on, saying, teach these things freely unto your children. And in time they are to reach us. The rule is that many books of every kind are handed down from one generation to another, even until they, the people, have fallen into transgression. That's Helaman 3:15. At which time they disappear until another prophet brings them forth. Next to Enoch himself, the greatest transmitter of the records would seem to be Moses, by whose hand we receive the records that came through Enoch and his successors. And it is Moses who gives us the key to the whole thing. And now, Moses, my son, thou shalt write the things which I shall speak. And in a day when the children of men shall esteem my words as naught, and take many of them from the book which thou shalt write, behold, I will raise up another like unto thee, and they shall be had again among the children of men, among as many as shall believe.
So, quick question there. Nibley says that Moses essentially has the records from Adam through Enoch.
That or he's getting
he's getting it by revelation.
He's getting it by the revelation. And I kind of view that, like we talked about heavenly counterparts with personages, right? Like there's also the heavenly counterpart, in my opinion, to what gets written by inspiration
Right.
on the earth too. So it's never lost.
Okay.
Fully, right? Because the angels are also the scribes.
Right. They're taking it down too. So the idea that Moses may get a record from heaven and have it taken back up isn't out of the realm of possibility.
Not at all. And so it's super interesting though that Nibley points out that next to Enoch, Moses is the guy, but we see strong similarities in other places with Enoch and Moses, like all the people hate me for I am slow of speech.
Right.
And God tells Moses and Enoch the same thing, except in Moses's case, he asked for a spokesperson anyways.
Right.
Right. But interesting that that parallel is there.
Yeah.
We covered in our Old Testament classes that we see that according to the Pearl of Great Price here, Adam's writing a book, keeping records. In the Adam literature, Seth makes a record after Adam dies, and that's passed down, and it makes it all the way to the Temple of Solomon.
Wow.
You recall that?
Yep, I do.
And Enoch is making the records too, right? And we see this in the Doctrine and Covenants. Adam on Diamond, it says, 3 years previous to the death of Adam, he called Seth, Enos, Canaan, Mahalalel, Jared, Enoch, and Methuselah, who were all high priests, with the residue of his posterity who were righteous, into the valley of Adam on Diamond, etc. And these things were written in the book of Enoch and are to be testified of in due time. So there is a book of Enoch, an actual book of Enoch that our historical figure Enoch wrote that we don't have, that is not these pseudepigraphal books of Enoch that we're going to talk about. And pseudepigrapha is a fun term that smart people with degrees use that basically is literature that was written between 200 years of Christ's life. So whether before
either side.
Okay.
Yeah.
That's attributed to an earlier figure, usually a patriarch.
Gotcha. Okay, that makes sense.
And so a scholar today, although it's the definition would have to be broader if they do this, but they could say that our book of Moses is pseudepigrapha because Joseph Smith is producing
that's true.
a book in the name of Moses.
Right.
Or
They
Abraham.
They wouldn't want to give him that honor though.
No, but yeah, it's interesting.
Yep.
to consider, because it goes back to this
Tradition. Yeah.
writing by the spirit of
Yeah.
inspiration.
Yeah.
Also fun to note, Adam would be, if the timelines are right and accurate, Adam would be 622 years old when Enoch was born. Adam was 687 years old when Enoch had uh, his calling and ascension into the presence of God
Right.
when Enoch was 65, right? Enoch would have been 305 years old when Adam blessed the residue of his posterity at Adam on Diamond, and Enoch was 308 years old when Adam ascended back into heaven.
Phew.
And Adam's ascension into heaven is 122 years before the city of Enoch's ascension into heaven.
Man, that puts everything in some proximity, right? You start to understand
Mm-hmm.
the generations.
Yep. So the calling of Enoch. God says to Enoch, and for these many generations, ever since the day that I created them, have they gone astray and have denied me and sought their own counsels in the dark, and in their own abominations have they devised murder and not kept the commandments which I gave to their father Adam. Wherefore they have forsworn themselves, and by their oaths they have brought upon themselves death, and a hell I have prepared for them if they repent not. And when Enoch had heard these words, he bowed himself to the earth before the Lord and spake before the Lord, saying, Why is it that I have found favor in thy sight, and am but a lad, and all the people hate me, for I am slow of speech? Wherefore am I thy servant? And the Lord said unto Enoch, Go forth and do as I have commanded thee, and no man shall pierce thee. Open thy mouth, and it shall be filled, and I will give thee utterance, for all flesh is in my hands, and I will do as seemeth me good. Say unto this people, Choose ye this day to serve the Lord God who made you. Behold, my spirit is upon you. Wherefore, all thy words will I justify, and the mountains shall flee before you, and the rivers shall turn from their course. And thou shalt abide in me, and I in you. Therefore, walk with me. So back to the oaths. He says, By your oaths you have brought upon yourselves death. So that's interesting because, in a way, that kind of harkens to the Enoch literature about the angels
Right.
swearing an oath to themselves. They come down upon what's called Mount Hermon, and 200 watchers or whatever, and they make a covenant with each other saying, we're going to go down and do this, and we're going to go take the daughters of men, and we're going to go raise up children, and we're going to go live upon the earth. And they made an oath to do that.
Let me
And
ask
so
you,
by their oaths, they have brought up themselves death.
let me ask you this. Just a thought. When we enter the temple, when we start dealing with that part of the gospel, we make oaths there as well.
Yep.
Is there any possibility that these oaths that they're talking about, the reason they're oaths of death, so to speak, is because they made a holy covenant and then just ignored them?
There's that. There's also, I was going to bring up that we see the counterfeit priesthood from Cain in this era,
Right.
which there, and not only imitation oaths of the temple, but the secret combination oaths. We're just
Right.
going to refer to the secret combination oaths to murder and get gain. It just is the same. But
Right.
in any case, there's an oath is
Right.
the prominent theme.
Gotcha. Gotcha. Okay. The other thing that I find fascinating, and we see this with Moses, we see this with other prophets. Everybody seems to be reluctant, right?
Mhm.
And that gives me a little bit of hope for my own destination, right? Because I'll be honest, there's been times he's asked me to do things and I've argued, right? I'm like, nope, you got the wrong dude. You got to go find somebody else. I know nothing about whatever it is you want me to do. You're going to have to go find someone else. I think, I think that the way this goes is why they question the calling, right? I don't think it's with these prophets. I don't think it's out of laziness or just an undesire. I think it's you got the wrong guy because I'm not qualified.
Sure. And you see with Moses,
The
the
very same thing.
man is nothing, which thing I have never before supposed.
Right.
Because when they have an experience, they realize that they are nothing to the majesty of God.
Right. Yep. And so I think that's something we can draw out from there. When he tells you to do something, don't worry about being qualified. Just go get it done.
Yeah,
And he'll make up the
I
difference.
will justify your words.
Right. Exactly. Exactly.
No, I love all of that. So, and that this part here, thou shalt abide in me, and I in you, therefore walk with me. Um, we'll touch more on what it means to walk with God. Actually, I think I have that later. It's somewhere in there. But so we have Enoch face to face with God. Who is the question, right? How does this the age old question to Adam God believers, for
Right.
example, is if Adam is God, then how come Enoch is talking to God or whatever, you know?
There's a few possibilities here, right? And at some level, I think as Adam God believers, if you have, it's never bad to question those things, right? I'm a big believer that that's one of the gifts of Mormonism. There's plenty for you to explore. Um, but I've struggled with the same thing, and to be honest, I'm like, does it matter? Does it matter if he gets his charge from Adam? Does it matter if he gets a charge from Adam's God? Doesn't really matter. It's still the same charge from a line of proper authority, and you got to go.
So we'll read a statement from Brigham Young I really like when he addresses this, but before that, we're gonna analyze, in my opinion, which God this isn't.
Okay.
Process of elimination. This God is not Jesus Christ.
Right.
This is not the antemortal
Right.
Christ. Why is it not the antemortal Christ? Well, we go back to the Book of Mormon in the Book of Ether, and you have the brother of Jared and his experience. I'm going to read that. That's in Ether through chapter 3, verse 14 and 15. When the brother of Jared has the veil lifted and has that experience, Christ tells him, "Behold, I am Jesus Christ. I am the Father and the Son. In me shall all mankind have life, and that eternally, even they who shall believe on my name, and they shall become my sons and daughters. And never have I shown myself unto man whom I have created, for never has man believed in me as thou hast. Seest that ye are created after mine own image? Yea, even all men were created in the beginning after my own image." And so, okay, I believe in the Book of Mormon.
Right.
So Christ is telling the brother of Jared, I have never shown myself unto man. Is that problematic? The way I reconcile that with, oh, does that mean no one had ever seen Christ? I would say that if God had revealed Christ to
Right.
some patriarchs, then that wouldn't contradict this.
Nope. No.
But because he says, I've never shown myself, I've never introduced myself. But we see a pattern in the scriptures, in the New Testament, in the Book of Mormon, uh, Joseph Smith,
Right.
the Father is introducing the Son and testifying of the Son.
Right.
And so that would not break this pattern. In fact, this is the break in the pattern that the brother of Jared is seeing Christ introduce himself.
And that's why Christ goes out of his way to say,
Right.
never before.
Have I shown myself
Right.
unto man? So Enoch would not be seeing Christ, who has, in this instance, who has never revealed himself unto
Right.
man.
Nope, that makes sense.
Also, this is a hang up scripture with some people with weird Trinitarian adjacent ideas.
Sure.
But using Christ's own words to define what he means by I am the Father and the Son, he qualifies that. In this passage we just read, he says, they shall become my sons and my daughters. That's
Right.
it's right there. I am the Father because they shall become. Not that they are, because we're not
Right.
yet. We're in the
Right.
process of becoming.
Yep.
And so,
Okay.
and so he defines the term right
I
there.
see.
If
I
you
see
really
where it's
read it,
going.
he's defining
Yep.
what he means by he's the Father and the Son. Brigham Young said, I will tell you about the God with which you and I worship. It is a being that was on an earth like this. He had been clothed in mortality, the same as we have been. And he has had devils to fight, the same as we have. But I do not expect that they were the same devils that we have. That God says that I am your God, and there is none else. Let us worship him and none else. He is the God that we have, no matter what gods Enoch saw when the heavens were opened unto him. If the God that he saw had been exalted millions of years before our God was, he also would have had to occupy an earth like ourselves, and we shall find out at some period, and this is all the mystery there is about it, And if we are faithful, we in our turn shall be exalted and become gods, and there will be no mystery about it when we understand it.
Mm,
So he's addressing the Adam God doctrine there because he's been teaching the Adam God doctrine for publicly for 8 years by the point that he gave that little excerpt. And he's kind of addressing what probably was brought up.
right,
How does this work with what Enoch? And he says it doesn't matter what gods Enoch saw.
right.
Our God was exalted on the same principle. The gods that Enoch saw were exalted upon the same principle. Doesn't matter if it was a million years before our God was exalted. We're going to be in the same position.
So his answer was pretty much close to what I was.
Yeah,
It doesn't
absolutely.
really matter.
Absolutely.
Yep.
It's a family.
Perfect.
It's a family business.
It's a family affair.
Mm-hmm. So walking with God is interesting. So Abraham says something like, "This is the God before whom I walk," and that's different than walking with God a little bit.
Right.
And so walking with God denotes not that Abraham wasn't extremely righteous, but that Enoch, being extremely righteous, that God walks with him as well, and that Enoch is also a celestial traveler, just as God is.
Interesting.
That's an interesting way to define that term, right? Is now that Enoch walking with God isn't just, oh, I've talked to him, but I'm walking about the universe just the same as God does. Because he's seeing everything. He gets taken into heaven. In all the literature that we're going to get into, that's a big theme.
So let me ask you this then. Where does that place Enoch? Does that mean that he's translated? Does that mean he's resurrected? I mean, what does that mean if he's walking in the same place as God is?
It's a great question.
There's some implications to that statement.
The literature straight up insinuates he's exalted
Okay.
in the way that we would term it. I'm not talking about what Joseph Smith taught, but I'm talking about what the pseudepigraphal stuff says. Enoch is straight up exalted. It is the way that we would have to describe how it's.
But we know
talking about.
we do know he was born here.
Oh yes, yes.
Interesting.
Which is even more interesting, right? Because it's deification or apotheosis,
Right.
of early Christianity. Absolutely. Yeah, we're going to talk a lot about that. But so Joseph Smith said Enoch's in a translated state. He also said that that's not the final state, that there has to be another transition to a fullness of glory. We just don't know what that looks like. I kind of take the stance personally, like, okay, maybe that has happened. I don't know, or something close to it. Maybe not fully. Maybe he can't fully attain to all the privileges of the Godhead in his own sphere because this work hasn't been done on this earth yet.
Right.
But he's essentially got the promise of it, at
Right.
the very least, right?
Absolutely.
So as far as his actual state, I couldn't tell you. Besides that, he has been translated, maybe a step beyond that, maybe in queue to active God mode.
Right. Okay.
Because the Christ hasn't even received the fullness until he presents his kingdom to the
Godhood
Father,
in escrow.
Right. Yeah. But yeah, I just thought that was fascinating to define that walking with God as Enoch being the celestial traveler. All right, I'm going to read some from a scholarly article on the Books of Enoch, and this was from what was it called? This is a paper called "The Evolution of the Patriarch Enoch in Jewish Tradition" by a guy named Miller. So the book, before we jump into that, the Books of Enoch, the first book of Enoch, what we call 1 Enoch or first Enoch, the Ethiopian version, it's the oldest one that we're aware of. It's got like parts, like other books within the book of Enoch, right? So we have something called the astronomical book, which is probably the oldest or among the oldest literature, which some people think is about 300 BC.
Okay.
Other elements were written more like 100 BC, and it all gets stitched together, right? So it's like a complete thing probably by the time of Christ, but it's written on that spectrum between 300 and 100, first century BC, right? So astronomical book, there's the Book of Similitudes, there's the Book of Noah, There's what is called the animal apocalypse, and then there's parables. There might be others, I don't recall. In any case, the scholar guy says in the astronomical book, which is First Enoch, chapter 72 through 82, also known as the Book of the Luminaries, we learn what it may have meant that Enoch walked with God. Here we follow him on an angelically guided tour of the heavenly sphere. The angels meticulously describe the celestial mechanics, the laws of the sun and the moon, their phases and timekeeping, along with a prediction that in the days of the sinners, the heavenly bodies will begin to fall out of phase, and an evolving chaos will envelop the earth as both nature and humanity grow out of sync with their prescribed order. This is the stuff that all the Christians hated, right?
Sure. Yep.
That stuff. Once Enoch is led away from God's presence, he witnesses again the basic mechanics of the universe, the places where the winds are stored, the foundation of the earth, and the cornerstones of heaven, and the paths of the angels, the place of the punishment for rebellious stars which deviated from God's timetable, the captivity of wicked angels, and the enclosures for human souls, where their spirits are separated into good and evil until the great day of judgment. So, like, yeah, there's like this idea, for example, that there's like heavenly storehouses that contain things like wind, rain, the elements.
Right.
He sees these things. They're putting it. The author is putting it into terms that we don't understand that
Right.
now, but and we have other ways of describing that, right? But that's what
he had. Yeah.
The idea is that he's being shown just the way nature works.
Right.
Right. Through all of this, he is guided by angels who write down information for him and answer his questions. Enoch is relentlessly curious, repeatedly probing the angels for information about the things that he sees, and it provides a new take on the origin of evil. No longer are Adam and Eve to blame, but the fallen angels who led humanity astray. These elements, which present a challenge to the received biblical tradition, indicate an outsider nature typical of apocalyptic literature, which finds fault in the world and contemporaneous society, and it is not surprising that we find the literature among the separatist Qumran community, Dead Sea Scrolls
Right.
people, right? He travels through the heavens, witnessing secrets unknown by other humans. He is the scribe, recording the order of the cosmos and history, and absorbing the angelic duty of documenting the actions of human beings. So, after going through with the angels who are writing things down, he kind of takes up the scribal role, right? Continuing, he says, he is righteous and has a special role in regard to the righteous, who can be identified as the people of Israel, or at least those among them who obediently keep God's laws. There is a primordial placement in which he was intended to fulfill as this righteous and chosen exemplar, which has, by the time of the similitudes, a hint of angelic status, which positions him as a judge of humankind and an inaugurator of the end of days. From the 2nd century BC onwards, the assault of the unrighteous grows, as does the description of their punishment, indicating the tension which the authors perceive in the world. So, break there. If this is being written 2nd century, 1st century BC, what's happening in Judea?
1st and 2nd century Judea.
They're under Roman occupation, right? And you have all these different sects of Judaism.
Right, you got the Essenes, you got
the Pharisees, the
Sadducees. I think this is the same time where the Gnostics are starting to come into play.
All these groups out there, and they're all claiming to be the inheritor of the truth. And so, and the other sects are bad, and they're apostate, and they're corrupting it. And in some cases, that was probably true. And so that's the way that the Qumran community, which the Essenes and others associate with that. That's how they look. They were the righteous recluses and prophets who had left the society and were waiting for Babylon to be destroyed, and then they'd go back and build up a heavenly Jerusalem on earth, right? With a new temple and all of that.
This is fascinating, and I feel like that this has some very pointed commentary that we as fundamentalists need to make note of, right? Because with and Justin Frankham and I just released an episode this Saturday about the splits in Christianity, right? And it's eerily similar, right? Eerily similar to what we have in Mormonism today. But with the Essenes, the Gnostics, those folks out there in Qumran, what you get is that you get a people that says, no, 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 we're gonna go do it the right way. The unfortunate part is their right way isn't always so right either, right? And I think that we need to be very careful as fundamentalists that we don't fall into that same trap.
Some have.
And some have, right? We got to be very careful that we don't just say, well, we're apart from them, so that must make us right. Because that's a very shaky standard to be using.
Yeah, but on the same hand, I get separating yourself and saying, I want to do right and I can't do right if I'm associated
No.
with these guys, so I'm gonna leave.
No, I agree with the separation portion. What I don't what I'm always careful of is separation does not necessarily mean correctness.
No, you
right?
gotta do correct to be correct.
You have to be correct in order to be correct. And that's where I think the warning should come in with fundamentalists, right? I'm not saying that we shouldn't have broken with the LDS Church. I'm just saying that we need to be very careful that we don't use the separation as the litmus test for what is correct.
No, but we are following kind of in some of the same ground there, right? With we're analogous to the Essenes, to the Pharisees in a sense, coming
Right.
out of the church, right? Or
Right.
Sadducees, whatever parallel you want to make.
Right.
It's fascinating to me and if once we're done with this series, however long it goes, I would even love to do a dive on the Judaic sects of this time
Absolutely.
too.
Yeah.
That'd be super fun to me. But yeah, so you see in First Enoch, it's all hellfire and damnation
Right.
because the people who are holding this book of scripture are anticipating God's impending judgment on all the
Right.
guys who are wrong. All the other groups. Yeah, no, it's straight up, dude. It's so this guy, back to the article, right, is as the assault of the unrighteous grow, which is all the apostates, if not also the Roman oppressors, right? The description of their punishment grows in the literature, right? Those two things are related. The unrighteousness growing and the punishment also becomes more severe, indicating the tension which the authors perceived in their world. The land of Israel was in turmoil at this time, subject to conquest after conquest as the people suffered under the harsh vicissitudes of different rulers. The authors are keen to see the final judgment when God will reward the faithful and punish those who persecuted them. We also see that the person and nature of Enoch grows more central as the textual tradition evolves. Where the astrological book and the Book of the Watchers, that's another one of the books,
Right.
Yeah, the Book of the Watchers, in First Enoch are principally concerned with the cosmos, and Enoch functions as a messenger and recorder of certain revelations. By the time of the Book of Similitudes, it is he, as the chosen one, who has become the subject of revelation, the one hidden before time, who will only be revealed when his influence is required. So that's where he kind of assumes the Son of Man
Right.
mantle, right?
Yep.
And while the first booklets place Enoch as a witness and recorder of the sins and virtues of human beings, by the latest, he himself enacts the judgment for those actions. So he goes from being the witness of the virtues and vices to being the guy who deals out the judgment in the end.
Enoch does.
Yeah, in this literature. And you kind of see that spectrum. It's not just in First Enoch, but like it becomes more pronounced
Right.
throughout all three. First one, two, and three Enoch. The purpose of Enoch's elevation is unremarked until, on the brink of the seventh heaven, Gabriel commands him to stand up and come with him and stand in the face of the Lord forever. And this is a quote. In order to be presented before God, no, I guess it's not. I just have it in bold here. In order to be presented before God, Enoch is redressed in clothes of glory and anointed, whereby I had become like one of his glorious ones. That's a quote. And there was no observable difference. The identification with the angelic host is foreshadowed in the previous literature, but from this point, Enoch takes on a primordial function which quickly surpasses what we might have expected. Initially, he is made a recorder, writing the entire course of history, natural and human, the fate of all souls, and even every language and the rules that humanity lives by. After this indoctrination, God personally begins to educate Enoch and shares with him the secrets of the process of creation, to which not even the angels were privy. Enoch now knows everything. He reels off a list of his knowledge, which encompasses both time and space for either For either from the lips of the Lord, or else my eyes have seen from the beginning even to the end, the heavens and their boundaries and their contents. Enoch has again undergone a physical transformation in his encounter with God when he returns to the world. Having completed his testimony, I love this part, his face is chilled in order that humans can safely look at him.
Chill.
Yeah, and there's two, that's not the part that I recalled when I first read that passage, but that passage when I was reading the first book of Enoch distinctly stuck out to me because it's actually his face is also chilled when he gets into the presence of God. And I'm
Hmm.
like, oh, well, he has to be preserved because God's face is
Right.
burning glory, right? So his
Right.
face is he's transfigured, as we would
Yep.
put it, right? But
Yep.
then when he goes back to earth, he's shining like Moses,
Right.
and he has to be chilled so he doesn't irritate them or whatever. You know what I mean? So that they can even look at him because they can't behold the glory that's on Enoch when he returns from heaven.
This is the stuff where I start to wonder, am I really going to make it? Because my first thought is that you got guys just down there in Enoch City working, and then Enoch comes back and he's maybe unaware that he's like shining, and everyone's just kind of looking away and causes some self-conscious kind of things. And
And once he has declared his moral missive, the people embrace him and adorn him with yet another accolade. Now he is the one who carries away the sin of mankind. This salvific role, while a logical conclusion from his capacity in prescribing righteous behavior, is yet another step forward to a nature which could not have been predicted from the earliest books. He is no longer a human taken to heaven and transformed into an angel, but a celestial being exalted above the angelic world.
mm.
And so, bearing in mind,
So there's a definite deification
no, there's
in there.
straight up, it's going to get heavy too. We're not even fully there yet, but it's in an age, right? We're talking about when this book is being written, like 2 centuries before Christ, under Roman occupation.
Mm-hmm.
What were the Jews looking for?
They were looking for a political Messiah. They were looking for one who would vanquish the Romans, reinstate the rule of the house of David.
And so the Enoch becomes the figure in the
Right.
scriptures being used because this was scripture at this point.
Right.
Maybe it was debated in some schools. Maybe the Pharisees didn't like it, for example. I could almost guarantee you the Sadducees probably hated it.
Yep.
The Essenes loved it. But in any case, Enoch is being assigned the Messiah role that they're waiting for.
Right.
It's also interesting that there might be other utility, so to speak, in making this book of Enoch for them because what were the Sadducees all about? They're about law of Moses, law of Moses, law of Moses. If they
Right.
can ascribe an authority to themselves that predates Moses and say
Right.
our authority comes from Enoch, they can supersede the other guys that they don't agree with in Jerusalem, saying
That's
we're
fascinating.
following Moses because the priesthood of the Levites was yeah. Anyways, we're gonna
So is there any scholarly work to give credence to that thought?
yeah, I read some of it. I don't have it
Okay.
quoted here too, but that's why I'm bringing it up because you have in the book of I think it's Second Enoch. I could be wrong on that, but maybe it's first too. You have I think it is Second Enoch. Second Enoch, you have or is it third? It's in one of them, but Enoch goes up to one of the mountains, and or Enoch descends from heaven onto one of the mountains. Someone else is up there, and Enoch has brought the Torah from the heavens. And so
Mm.
that is a one upping of the Moses tradition, so to speak, that was prevalent at the time. That's essentially saying we have access to heaven and heavenly laws. Maybe you've changed the Torah. We have the original that Enoch gave us. All those things. And so you have this explicit mention of Enoch being the first to deliver the Torah in one of those books of Enoch to the
So
people.
so let me ask you this, because this is always where it gets dicey, right? Because we know the book itself isn't really written, like you were saying, until 200
Hmm.
years either side of Christ.
Hmm.
Doesn't mean the oral tradition wasn't around,
That's true. Or components of it, right?
or components of it. But still, how much weight do you give that, right? I mean, because it is coming from a pseudepigraphal source.
on a certain so on a certain level, I'm just addressing that like scholarly, like this is what it's
Okay.
being used as to like one up the claims of the priesthood authority that they don't agree with.
Right.
And right, because it's anyways, I lost my train of thought there. But you have in one of them, one of these books, you Second Enoch starts ascribing one of the names Sadiq or Zadik to Enoch, which means righteous, the
Okay.
righteous one. Well, that's Melchizedek.
Right.
And so it's also this tradition that Enoch, Melchizedek priesthood, were trumping your Levitical Aaronic priesthood.
Okay.
And it's also interesting that the Essenes, some of them, I don't know if all of them were this way, but some, I don't know how much variance there was, flexibility in that culture. I don't know how correlated it is, to
Right.
use that word, that where everything in the church today is super super
Correlated.
correlated.
Yeah.
I don't know how correlated that community was, um, as far as respecting certain ideas and traditions, but it looks like in that area that certain descendants of Zadok, the priest that was priest during David and Solomon's reign, they had gotten kicked out from Jerusalem, and that was the line that had ruled in Jerusalem for forever,
Okay.
as priests. And so you had under the Maccabees, a new line
Right.
was put in one, and so you have these. Zadok is also the second part of Zadok, right?
Right.
Melchizedek. And so you have the Zadokite exile priests saying that Enoch is the Zadik, the righteous one. Are they claiming Melchizedek priesthood, or is that how the scholars are just seeing? And maybe there was something there, that there was actually Melchizedek priesthood being restored to the earth
Right.
that did supersede. Just super interesting to put these terms into our
Yeah.
vernacular language as Mormons.
Yeah. Absolutely. Well, the implications are high too.
Yeah.
I mean, the implications are absolutely
Yeah, because they're talking about an Enoch figure as a Messiah. He's being also associated with Enoch and Melchizedek are being associated together. Uh, that was another big figure at the time.
right.
You have Paul talking about how Melchizedek was just the type for Christ, but it's all that Messiah imagery.
Right.
That's what their focus is at this point.
Well, and we use the term the Messiah, and we're very specific with it, right?
Hmm.
I don't think that same specificity existed during this time period, right?
Hmm.
And so when we talk about the Messiah, we're talking about a spiritual deliverer that will someday be a physical or temporal deliverer in the last days. During this time, especially around Jesus's time, they're looking for somebody physical. They want someone to ride in triumphant with a sword drawn and to put down the
Yep.
oppressors.
Yeah, and that's what they expected Enoch to come and do. Although there is some intimation that he was going to do some saving from sin there too, from what we were reading, right?
Really?
So yeah, yeah, but he was also going to be completely relentless on the wicked and the apostates, just the
True.
same. Uh, Second Enoch, this guy says, draws significantly on popular Jewish philosophy, which the author recasts in a mythical setting. While the booklets of First Enoch were preserved by sectarians, such as the Qumran community, something which indicates outsider background of a group unhappy with the direction of Israel's religion and offering an alternative narrative, as we just discussed, Second Enoch manages to take these traditions and incorporate them into a somewhat middle class Hellenized atmosphere, which, although still not at one with popular religion in Judea, is relatively content with the current state of society and religion. Enoch's testimony does not damn the unrighteous, but encourages personal good deeds, and the fire and brimstone of First Enoch's later strata are replaced with a complex and philosophically inclined depiction of the creation of the visible world from the invisible. This new emphasis, combined with a Hellenistic individualism, may have helped solidify the focus on the person of Enoch as a kind of mediator of redemption. The absence of nationalistic Hebrew history is only part of a dynamic which is both personal and universal. However, this development would not have been possible without the transformation that takes place in the Book of Similitudes, which was in First Enoch. For it is only here that Enoch first became a person of cosmic importance rather than simply a prophet. It is because of Enoch's elevation to the status of chosen one that he can, in Second Enoch, take the new role as one of the heavenly host, a translation which also paves the way for later developments. Let's get this now into Third Enoch. Third Enoch, he's basically God at this level,
Right.
and he gets a fun name. It's kind of sounds like a transformer if the audience knows what I mean, but they call him Metatron.
Okay.
Now this is interesting. So maybe I'll just read this. But at some point, Enoch's elevation into heaven and incorporation into the angelic retinue earns him a new name, Metatron. In the most textually solid and singular work, the Sefer Hekkalot, that's like the Book of Holy Places, is what that translates to, I think. Or Hekal in this word Hekkalot can mean a palace or a big room or a hall or temple.
Okay.
So in the Sefer Hekkalot, or Third Enoch, that's the scholarly designation, Metatron tells his own history of having been taken from Earth as a human when he was Enoch, the sole righteous member of his generation. And Rabbi Ishmael, who's writing the book, stands mute as Metatron recounts his blessings, saying, with a throne like God's own with a throne like God's own, at the entrance to the seventh heaven, a robe and a crown fashioned by God himself, transformed into fire and made prince and ruler over all angels. One could perhaps be forgiven for thinking Enoch has now reached his apogee, and if this were not enough, God titles him the Lesser Jehovah. So anytime the Tetragrammaton shows up, I'm just going to say Jehovah. You're not going to catch me saying Yahweh. I'm not going to go into why. I just don't like it. But so Jehovah. So he's getting the title Lesser Jehovah. He's getting called Metatron. So Third Enoch is written by a guy who was born in 90 AD. His name is we just call him Rabbi Ishmael. It was Rabbi Ishmael ben Joseph something.
Okay.
Whatever. Born in 90 AD. So he's right in the 2nd century after Christ.
Right.
Scholars say that this book, Third Enoch, has undergone multiple recensions or redactions, edits, essentially, at least until 5th or 6th century BC, or 80, sorry. So it's getting toyed with until about 500 AD.
It's been altered for 500 years.
Yeah, at the very least. It's also super convoluted in my opinion. In my opinion, I could not get through it. But there are like 2 redeeming elements of it, I think. Anyways, we'll jump into that in a second. Finishing this stuff. Actually, no, pause. So Rabbi Ishmael, is taking the role similarly to what Enoch is in First and Second Enoch. He's a man being taken into the heavens by angels, Michael, Gabriel, Raphael, seeing God. Now Ishmael is being taken into the presence of Enoch by angels. And Enoch or Metatron is relating how he came to that position. This is talking about exaltation, right?
Right.
In our vernacular language.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's one of the redeeming elements of it.
And again, the implications are kind of earth-shattering, right?
They are. No, huge. They're huge. Yeah. The things I don't like that's convoluted about it is it just goes through ridiculous amounts of hierarchies of angels and things that are, in my mind, incomprehensible. They're just too complicated to be,
right.
And maybe it's because I don't understand Hebrew and the translation. A lot of that is just like literally transliterated into English and like not interpreted. Like it's a really strong translation,
right?
Like literal translation. So maybe that's part of it.
I think the answer is you just got to take more Hebrew, Michael.
Yeah,
I don't want to do it. That sounds like a lot of work. You should do that.
So the guy Miller continues, while Enoch was guided around by heaven by angels in his earlier literature, it is now Metatron who leads the Rabbi Ishmael, offering many of the same visions as he himself had. He enumerates leagues of angelic beings who preside over the aspects of heaven, ensuring its daily functioning. The souls of the righteous and the wicked have not yet been created, and the souls of the patriarchs Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. The history of Adam, or the history of humanity from Adam to the Messiahs, and that means Messiah ben Joseph and Messiah ben David or Judah. So that's where you start seeing in this
Right.
third book of
Yep.
Enoch, you have the dual Messiah
Yeah.
idea there. That pops. I thought that was interesting. This is all a long way from the initial conception of Enoch as simply a patriarch, even a particularly righteous one. But we can recall from the conclusion of Similitudes, where Enoch is named before the sun and the moon were created, and by the time of second Enoch, he is who would heal humanity's primal sin. It is surely no accident that in his function as the first man, Metatron, is also named Zadik, or the righteous one, which gets back into the Melchizedek thing that we're, this primordial heavenly Melchizedek figure.
Right.
Right. And so, yeah, in second Enoch, you start seeing stuff like pre-existence. It's all throughout actually, but where Enoch is seeing that he was named before the moon and the sun were created,
Right.
before the planet was. That's all starkly Mormon.
Right. I'm trying to wrap my mind around all the implications of this, right?
Yeah, we should hear you talk for a second.
Because here's some of the questions that this brings up, right? And it's something I'm not completely comfortable with, so I'll await your explanation on this. But they seem to be turning Enoch into kind of a savior, right?
Mhm.
But that seems to fly in the face of Jesus being the savior, does it not?
Oh, it sure does. And
so at that point, you have to say, and this is where these kind of sources get iffy, right? Because
big time to me.
because you
I'm
got
not endorsing that wholesale.
right. No, I didn't think you were, but how do you wrap your mind around this then, right? At what point do you say this is hyperbole, ancient hyperbole, right? Or is this um inspired truth that's coming to us? How do you tear that apart?
So I'm a big fan of taking a step back and looking at types and shadows.
Okay.
Psychology calls it archetypes,
Right.
figures like that, and seeing what's the moral, what's the archetype and the symbolism saying, and how can I apply that generally? Maybe I can see a better picture. How do
Right.
I apply the archetype in a construct of Mormonism? In my
Okay.
own vernacular? How can I reconstruct that using what I know is strongly rooted through Joseph Smith? But it requires looking at it step back through archetypes. I think the historical context really helps about talking about like this late Second Temple Judaism and the Roman
Right.
occupation, and you're seeing a competition between sects and their priesthoods. And you see, I think that really helps you interpret what's really being said here. But also this idea, you're right on the head that we need to understand that Jews did not stop being Jews when Christ came on the earth.
Right.
They were still looking for a Messiah, and they did not think Christ fit the bill.
Right.
And so to Rabbi Ishmael, he's going to be growing up reading First and Second Enoch, and he's even extrapolating on that more so, which is interesting. But they're in their mind, they're still looking for that other kind of Messiah figure, and whether maybe Enoch just becomes the heavenly counterpart to some future, you know, zealot type hero that's going to liberate them from the Romans or whatever. I don't know how that all works out, but it helps to see what what is the text talking about? What is it criticizing truly?
Right.
And it's in some instances, I think that some of this is criticizing Christ. And I think
Right.
because they did not agree with Christianity. And so I will tell anyone who is reading this Enochian literature that you got to be careful with it, because I think some of it is antichrist
Yeah.
to an extent. But I think some of it can also be helpful.
Well, and I think that kind of hits the nail on the head, right? And this is where I've always told people, you're going to want to be real grounded in those basic things, because you're going to need that tether when you start diving into this.
You do.
Right, because you're going to always need to do various check with me sort of thing, like, okay, Jesus is still a Christ.
Mm-hmm.
Joseph's work probably takes precedent over anything this old. But nonetheless, there are some things that I think can be, like you were saying, can be drawn out to lend credence and support to Mormonism's claims.
Oh yeah, big time. And even Christianity's claims too. Like this stuff was popular to them, and so you could see like Jude or others who quote the Book of Enoch. They're kind of reverse engineering some of these things
Right.
and applying it to Christ. I think.
Right. Absolutely. Absolutely. The tone does change between, you know, First and Third Enoch, obviously,
Big
right?
time.
I tend to be, and granted, I probably haven't done nearly the research that you have. I tend to be way more comfortable with First Enoch than I do with the other books, right?
Mhm.
Because I want to say this, it could be just the way it reads, right? Enoch seems to be more approachable in those, and it reminds me more of the Enoch that Joseph Smith
Mhm.
lays out.
Yeah, absolutely. So we talked about fun things that Third Enoch has. To summarize, you have the two messiahs, which is if you eh, for those who don't know, there's an idea in rabbinic Judaism that there's supposed to be a Messiah figure raised up out of the tribe of Judah and
Hmm.
Joseph. And that's kind of an interestingly cool parallel for Joseph Smith being of the
Hmm.
out of the tribes of Joseph, Ephraim. Yeah,
Especially when you start looking at what the Messiah ben Joseph's supposed to do, right?
yeah.
Like very much a restorer kind of figure.
Um, Enoch by third Enoch, he we see as we covered, he's taken on the godly role because in Hellenistic Judaism, God's become more drawn back, and so you have to have a mediator figure. That was caused by the Greek philosophy, but you also have not just a knee-jerk reaction, maybe not knee-jerk, but a calculated reactionary dogma being asserted against Christianity intentionally.
Right,
But also they're dealing with, by the time that Rabbi Ishmael's around, the temple's gone,
right.
the temple's destroyed, and the priesthood's gone.
And
And so
see,
there's some of that that's going. The third Enoch comes up as a way. It's new revelation for the Jews. It's not the gospel. That's not what I'm saying, but it's revelation in quotes for them to deal with the crappy world that they're in right now.
and I was just gonna say, you cannot undersell the blow that the psyche of Judaism took by the priesthood being decimated and the temple being gone.
Yeah, they had to completely rework what their religion meant to them,
Right,
and this
absolutely.
is one of those books that did that.
Absolutely. And so when you're approaching especially second and third Enoch, you have to look at that. You have to understand that context because they are grasping for something, anything to hold on to. Judaism has to redefine itself now because your stuff is gone, your homeland is gone,
Hmm.
the temple is gone, your ruling factions are gone. How do you then bounce back?
Yep.
Right, and a lot of these books, what I find is trying to establish a new identity in the diaspora,
That's exactly what it is.
and that's going to come with some pain.
Yeah, so you see this imagery in second and third Enoch for sure, where Enoch's going through the seven heavens. Sometimes there's three. I don't. I think maybe first Enoch is three. I don't know if it's seven in that one as well. Uh, Stuff I was reading was interesting because I've been reading a lot about temple stuff in ancient Judaism recently, and the temple was divided into three parts. And in this ascent literature, and it's not always Enoch in some of this stuff, but you see these guys like Paul. I was in the third heavens. Well, what is that really saying? That's
Right.
talking about the temple,
Yep.
the three part space that's in the temple. Some scholars have said that in the latest period before the temple was destroyed, maybe it was actually separated into seven parts.
Mm.
And what we're seeing here with in third Enoch and maybe even in second as well, if it's undergone some later changes, is because there's no earthly temple, they're having to describe temple adjacent ideas in your mind by you're envisioning someone else passing through the temple.
Okay.
Rabbi Ishmael is going through the temple, through the seventh heavens, because Enoch went through for.
So it's kind of a temple parable.
It's a temple parable because the temple's gone.
Yep.
And it's a way to kind of preserve esoterically some of the stuff that was maybe going on. But there's also no one to officiate,
Right.
and so it's all just a construct.
Ooh.
And the scripture is there to provide a mental construct to teach something.
Right. Interesting.
Oh, super fascinating.
Yeah. Yeah. Because you don't just get theology, you get the socio-political climate of what this is coming to, and the corresponding holy writ that will now redefine Judaism.
The cool thing about the Enochian text with Rabbi Ishmael, there's one, I don't know if it's in Third Enoch or if it's a separate book that Rabbi Ishmael wrote. It's called the Shir Kamah. But Rabbi Ishmael describes an anthropomorphic corporeal god.
Okay.
And in fact, there's a guy, a famous rabbi later, Maimonides, which is like, if you see the name, you might be tempted to pronounce it Maimonides or Maimonides, but it's Maimonides. He hated this book, by Rabbi Ishmael. He said that's absolute heresy to say that God had a corporeal anthropomorphic body.
I think there's plenty of evidence in even proto-Hebrewism, if you will, that wasn't so far-fetched.
No, but yeah. Anyways, but that was kind of late. This is kind of
Yeah.
late for. I mean, he's like 5th or 6th century, and that's when this third book of Enoch is undergoing its latest edits. But Ishmael is saying God has a corporeal body. Let's see. Enoch is described nonetheless as a lesser Jehovah. He is on a throne in the seventh heaven. He's wearing a robe and a crown fashioned by God. It even cites Deuteronomy. Enoch cites Deuteronomy chapter 22 or whatever. There's a. I should have picked up the actual verse, but it's when during the Exodus where God is just getting fed up with Israel because they're just not listening, and he takes a step back and he says, here's this angel, he's gonna lead you, and you better do what he says, because he will not pardon you because my name is in him.
Right.
So the divine name, the name of Jehovah, is being placed in this angel. My take on that's Christ.
Right.
Christ is now leading the Exodus because they've rejected the priesthood that brought them into the presence of the Father.
Yep.
And so you have Rabbi Ishmael ascribing that verse to Enoch. He's the angel of the Lord's presence.
Right.
He's the angel that the Lord's name is in.
Right. With the imagery that's given there of Enoch being crowned with, a crown and a robe and sitting on the throne, right? The Messiah kind of imagery, or the godly kind of imagery. I can kind of see where that comes from, right? Because let's face it, at this time period, we've already lost some stuff, right? There's no doubt about that, right? Humanity has lost some of this stuff. So if you're a dude who's trying to put the pieces back together and someone says, well, Enoch in the city was taking up, your first thought is, oh, he's become a god in the full sense of the word. And it's not till Joseph Smith comes around and he's like, no, there's degrees to this thing, right? There's translation. I think this is the genius of Joseph Smith too, right? And what was revealed to Joseph is just those designations, so you don't get confused with this stuff. Because let's face it, if this is all you had to work with, you'd be hard pressed to try to Distance
Oh,
yourself
dude,
from that idea.
if I was in, I was thinking about this on the car ride down here tonight. If I was in a place where I was trying to reconstruct Christianity,
Right.
not, and we take out the factor that let's say the restoration didn't happen and I was inspired, maybe not inspired, whatever. But I was using my own mental faculties to but I knew something was wrong and I was trying to restore ancient Judaism and Christianity. I totally understand how, after reading some of this Second Temple Judaism stuff, how the Jehovah's Witnesses got Jesus Christ and Michael the Archangel together. That's
Right.
so close to the Adam God doctrine, but I can see that
Yeah.
because Michael gets the intercessor position,
Yep.
Christ is the intercessor position. I would have totally endorsed that position if I was just reconstructing
Yep. Yep.
something,
And that's
something.
yeah, and that's where I say paying attention to what Joseph taught and revealed about the orders of heaven, translation versus exaltation becomes super important.
They do, and so Joseph Smith is my litmus test. To me, Joseph Smith
I'm with you.
he is the Moses of our generation, and that's the measuring stick. I love what Brigham Young said, that he was paraphrasing off of a verse in the first epistle of John. John was dealing with these Gnostics, right? And he makes a statement which is kind of funny if we don't understand the historical context. He says, any person who does not, or any spirit who does not confess that Jesus Christ came in the flesh is Antichrist.
Mm-hmm.
Well, what the heck does that mean? Does that mean that I can go down the street to the evangelical church and they're going to say Jesus Christ came in the flesh? And does that mean whatever they say, because they're saying, yeah, praise Jesus, is that, they're totally good? No, but the Gnostics believed that Christ, because they believed in this super Hellenized idea that God can't be corporeal, that Christ was just a spirit the whole time, and resurrection doesn't make sense because matter is bad. And so John is leveling against them a heresy,
Right.
that whoever does not say that Jesus Christ was born literally, tangibly in the flesh and resurrected is Antichrist. And so Brigham Young uses that, but he updates the litmus test because that first, John is not relevant to us today because we're not dealing with that kind of
Right.
philosophy, right? But he says any spirit who does not confess that Joseph Smith lived and died a prophet of God is Antichrist.
Whew.
And I love that.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I love that. Yep.
And I would go on to add to that.
Mhm.
My testimony is any spirit that does not confess that Joseph Smith lived and died a prophet of God and that he restored the temple endowment and laws of God like consecration and celestial plural marriage that get you into the presence of God. If you don't believe in those things, then it's Antichrist.
I'm looking at you, Michelle Brady Stone.
Yeah, that's what Brigham Young called the measures of Joseph.
Yeah,
And
I don't think that's unreasonable, right? Um, I think not only do I think it's not unreasonable because of some things that I believe about Joseph Smith, it's there's some far-reaching things. I know where Brigham's going with this.
Mhm. Any further comments before I move on?
Nope, I'm
Yeah.
good.
So Metatron, we'll try to breeze through this. Possible etymology or the meaning or origin of the name. Some people have postulated it can mean behind the throne in Greek. One thing I found fascinating is the gematria values of the name for Metatron and Shaddai are equivalent. So the gematria value in esoteric Judaism is all the letters in Hebrew have a numerical value.
Oh, okay.
And so
Yep.
you can make fun little like footnotes to other things or literary connections between ideas that might not be so
Apparent.
exactly. And um, like serpent and Messiah have the same numerical value, and you see
Mm-hmm.
that imagery with the brazen serpent and on the pole and Moses
Right.
judging the children of Israel, they who look on it, and Nephi used that in the Book of Mormon. Well, Shaddai, which is the God of Abraham, El Shaddai, God Almighty. That's when you read in the King James version, whenever it says God Almighty, that's Shaddai.
Okay.
Um, Metatron and Shaddai are equivalent.
Okay.
So Ishmael is definitely equating Metatron with God.
Right.
Which he's not but he's not saying he is God. He's equating him. That gets back into the doctrine of exaltation, right?
Right.
This esoteric remnant of truth. Well, there's a
Right.
lot of convoluted crap in there, but that's the redeeming thing
Right.
throughout the whole book is that just is there if you're looking for it. Let's skip some of that. Let's see. In Third Enoch, also Third Enoch calls, even though Enoch is like literally God and above the angels, it's interesting that all the angels call him the youth or the lad, which
Interesting.
is what Enoch says to God
I am
when
but a
in our
lad.
pearl
Yeah.
of great price, I am but a lad and all people take me. Interesting. It's the only time that
Right.
that appears. And Rabbi Ishmael asks him, well, why do they call you the lad? And he says, well, because I came from the earth and I was younger than all of them.
Right.
I'm the new guy, but he's also above them all. Anyway, Third Enoch, chapter 48, says, I made honor, majesty, and glory his garment. So this is God talking to Rabbi Ishmael, I believe. I made honor, majesty, and glory his garment, beauty, pride, and strength his outer robe, and a kingly crown. I bestowed upon him some of my majesty, some of my magnificence, some of the splendor of my glory, which is on the throne of glory, and I called him by my name, the lesser Jehovah, the prince of the divine presence, knower of secrets. Every secret that I have revealed to him in love, every mystery I have made known unto him in uprightness. Um, so call Your
So
question.
yeah,
Let's hit that.
yeah. I want to make sure I'm understanding. So this is the God, so to speak,
Yeah.
talking about Enoch.
Hmm.
Now, when he starts talking about a lesser glory, a lesser whatever, that to me smacks of translation over exaltation.
Okay.
Oh, does that seem reasonable?
Yeah. In our term, well, I see what you're putting down, but at the same time, reading through this, like he's definitely this is talking more about the process of exaltation into godhood and obtaining the throne of the Godhead to me than just being brought
Okay.
back into the presence of God.
Okay. All right.
But I'm definitely understanding that we definitely should not be equating Enoch with God ourselves. But here's the part that blew my mind. That came to my mind when I was reading this. Enoch in this imagery throughout is repeatedly clothed in new garments with glory, crowned, anointed sometimes, and the name of God is being put upon him. And it occurred to me, and there's a striking connection that maybe we haven't realized with Mormonism and the garments, with that and the name of God being put upon you.
Mm-hmm.
The Tetragrammaton. Do you know what that means?
Hmm.
So that's the name. That's what the Jews call the name of God. It's
Okay. Okay. Okay.
Yod He Vod He. 4 letters. It's a 4 letter name.
Right.
4 characters. 4 marks.
Ooh.
4 marks
I
on the garment. And guess what?
hmm.
In the Tetragrammaton, 2 of the letters are the same. On the garment, 2 of the marks are the same.
I'm sure it's a coincidence.
That blew my mind.
Yeah.
Thinking about that.
Dude, that's nuts. That's nuts. Now,
And brought into the presence of God, crowned. Yeah, no, all of it. It's consistent. That's consistent
I'm
with
just
us, with our theology.
I'm just saying here, if on the surface that seems pretty
That's a dunk, dude. That's a three.
that's
Yeah,
that's a dunk. Now, because I'm always a guy who looks at both sides, the blessing and the curse of this, right? Um, I'm like, okay, so if you take that name upon you and then you take them off, so to speak, and you just stop, what's the ramifications of that?
I like that comment.
Right? What's the ramifications of that? If you have taken on that name
And put it away.
and then put it away.
Big yikes. No, yeah, I like that. So I actually do have that quote from one of these scholars who his name's Harold Bloom. And this is so freaking funny to me. He says about Joseph Smith, I can only attribute to his genius or daemons his uncanny recovery of elements in ancient Jewish theurgy that have ceased to be available to either Judaism or to Christianity, and that had survived only in esoteric traditions unlikely to have touched Smith directly. It's not the one I was thinking of, but yeah, that's a good one though.
Yeah, he's struggling with Joseph right there.
Yeah, big time.
He's struggling with him. He doesn't want to admit it, but he has to begrudgingly is what it feels like.
Yeah. Yeah, because he's not gonna on the other side, it's he must have had manuscripts, and he's like, I know fully well he didn't. So he's either genius or he's literally talking to spirits, daemons as he or demons,
Yeah,
as he's calling it.
Yep.
But yeah, so interesting.
Because he can't just be what he says he is.
No,
I mean that's not going to hold weight. Because
he's a professor somewhere on the East Coast. He
Right.
couldn't go say that.
Right.
Maybe that's his way of saying it without trying to say it.
Yep.
I don't know. But you had an experience with a college professor, something
I did.
similar.
I did. Yeah. I was back in Maryland. We did some side work for the University of Maryland as a perk.
Mm-hmm.
You could, take a course at discounted, and I wanted to take Jacksonian America because you can't really talk about Jacksonian America without talking about the Mormons. And when we start covering the burned over district in New York and that sort of time period, this professor and look, Mormons are pretty sparse for the most part once you get really past into Pennsylvania, right? I mean, we thin out quite a bit. Maybe some pockets and metroplexes and that sort of thing.
Yeah, DC's got a temple.
Yeah, yes, they do. But he opens up by saying this: when you're speaking of Joseph Smith, you have to come to one of two conclusions. He is either the most raw genius that certainly America, if not the world, has ever produced, or he was what he says he was. So I'm not going to tip my hand. I'm thinking I'm not going to tip my hand that I'm a Mormon right now, right? But towards the end of the semester, I did approach him. And I said, "Okay, I'm going to hold your feet to the fire. Which one is he for you?" And I'll never forget it. He just kind of leans back in his chair, and he looks at me, and he gets kind of a wry smile on his face, and he says, "I just don't ask the question."
All right, so that was a lot of the history, especially on the Jewish and early Christian side. We're going to get back into the theology.
Okay.
And Pearl of Great Price. I mean, actually, kind of all of it, but comparison of the theologies between our Pearl of Great Price and what we see in the first book of Enoch, especially. I think most of the rest is probably first Enoch, which came to be my favorite. It's a little clunky, at least the translation I read. I don't know what Ethiopian looks like. Maybe that can be forgiven. But in any case, we're going to get into the fun, weird stuff now.
Yeah. I was going to say, I think I said it earlier. First Enoch is by far my favorite because it's an Enoch that I recognize from Joseph Smith, right? And it's not an Enoch that seems to be deified as heavily.
I didn't mind second Enoch too bad. But yeah, first Enoch was definitely my favorite.
Yep. And you're right, it is clunky, but what can you expect from oral tradition passed down until 200 years either side of Christ? It's a little it's supposed to be clunky.
So we're gonna get into the Giants and the Watchers. Possibly maybe one of the most taboo subjects in the quote unquote deep doctrine.
I think I don't know why we're still discussing this, because I'm fairly sure that Russell Crowe and Darren Aronofsky in the movie Noah has answered this question for us. They were big rock people.
Big rock people.
They were big rock people, Michael. That's what they were.
So I had questions in our class, and so I had to answer them. And I put this guy off for like 2 months because I think he might have even asked them during like our Adam lesson, But in any case, the Giants. So we see the Giants are the offspring of angels, apparently, allegedly. Genesis 6 says the sons of God came down and married the daughters of men, and then there was the Agrigori, I think is how it's pronounced in Hebrew, or the Gibberim. and uh, and they're mighty men of renown and heroes of old.
Right.
Uh, and so it's like, okay, well, can this work with Mormonism, or some of the rabbis and early church fathers started saying, oh, these were the righteous posterity of Seth who married uh, uncovenant people,
Right.
and it was a apostasy. And is that true? It seems like, however, viewing things through a smart people with degrees kind of lens, when you look at the religion of the ancient Near East, it looks like the religion of that time period. When you look at places like Ugarit, which is about a
Right.
hundred or so miles north of Jerusalem, just south of Mount Zaphon, which was the Mount Olympus of like the Phoenicians, and that,
Right.
with Baal and all that. The father of the gods and the father of humanity was called El,
Right.
sometimes El Ab Adam or
Right.
Abu Adami, Father Adam, father of mankind. But he had 70 sons
Right.
who were also gods, and he had like three wives, so he's polygamist. Fun. That's a side note. But okay, so you have what is this is called the divine assembly, or the congregation of the
Right.
divine congregation. This seems like the literature is clearly referring to the idea that this is from it's referring to the congregation,
Right.
right? um the idea, then, scholars say, is as the Israelite religion evolved into monotheism, these gods, these 70 sons, which were also gods, devolved into angels.
Okay.
And so these angels, which were once gods, became, left
Right.
the heavens, went down to Mount Hermon, which is actually in the south. In the Enoch text, it was Mount Hermon, but then they went and did what they did, and some said, however, too, and I thought this was interesting, that this was a rebuttal to the Greek world, in a way, because at this time that Enoch is being written, Judaism is steeped in Greek philosophy,
Right.
and the nations around, and it's even been older than that, though, too. Babylon had their version, and Egypt. Actually, I don't know if Egypt had their version of demigods, but Babylon and Greece for sure had demigods, heroes
Well, yeah, if you
that,
look at Gilgamesh,
yeah.
Gilgamesh is depicted large enough that he's holding a full scale lion and it looks like a kitten, right? I mean,
And so, yeah, the authors or the scholars are saying this is a rebuttal to the Greeks and Babylonians who are saying, look at all these heroes that are the sons of gods.
right,
And the Jews are saying, no, these are bad.
right.
Don't get involved in this demigod hero story stuff. I could see, I see,
I could see that, but I think we're at a time in Jewish look. The Pharisees and Sadducees have no problems calling BS when they see it, right? So it seems a little less direct to me for them to be doing that. Does that make sense?
sure, sure. But I thought that opinion was interesting at the very least.
I think it's just as valid as any of the other ones. Let's
It
be honest. I
it
mean,
seems like in the Jewish camp and the Christian camp, the earliest interpretations also were that it was a divine assembly situation and not an apostasy situation.
okay,
Although, and I don't know for a fact on when the Jews changed their tune, but some of the Jews eventually started changing their tune because it's problematic. Um, and then they eventually just disregarded the Book of Enoch as a whole, anyways,
right,
get rid of the whole problem. But when Jerome translated the Bible into the Latin Vulgate,
right,
he was the one who actually started to, in the early church, um, postulate the idea that it was an apostasy situation. So
okay,
before that, it was definitely a divine congregation problem, an apostasy from on high, so to speak. But
right,
then to Jerome and to the rest of the church,
okay,
after the 5th century, it became, no, these are Seth's wayward children. But that doesn't really answer the giants thing, right? That's the criticism leveled against that opinion, right? Is it gets rid of this supposed mystical or supernatural element of the offspring being giants, and so you'd have to interpret that allegorically, right? Which
Right.
is fine if you do, but that just means you have to interpret it allegorically, not literally.
Right. All right. So I don't usually do this with guys. Where do you fall on it?
Man, why'd you have to do that? I don't have. Ooh, I don't know if I have a particular stance, um, besides just addressing the arguments. I would say that Joseph Smith did mention in Nauvoo that in reference to Genesis 6, he did say that this, in fact, I have the quote here. We're about to get into that, so let's read it. This is in George Lobb's journal. George Lobb wrote that Joseph Smith said, "Angels came down and took themselves wives of the daughters of men." See Genesis 6, verse 1 through 2. These were resurrected bodies, violated celestial laws. That's what George
Ooh.
Lobb wrote. Now, I've had people in last class, in fact, I believe it was last class, pointed out that seems to be a contradiction with section 130, which says that there is no angels who minister to this earth, but who have belonged to it. And so, if the resurrection hadn't taken place yet, how is it that there's resurrected angels on this earth siring children? So that's a one problem with that. First off, that's one seeming
Right.
contradiction. Um, that I just need to point out. Let's see. Did I skip over anything? But the Book of Moses says that giants are valid, and it says in chapter 7, verse 15, and the giants of the land also stood afar off, and there went forth a curse upon all the people that fought against God. So, okay, there were giants according to our Full Great Price. So I guess we can't really throw that out. Uh, And I guess it's already throughout the Old Testament too. You know, you have David and Goliath and the Rephaim and the children of Esau go and the Zuzazim or whatever, all those guys that were out living in the land of Edom,
Right.
out by Mount Seir. They were destroyed by Esau's and Ishmael's children. You know,
I think we have to wonder what are they defining as giants, right? Now look, I'm a pretty big guy. I go 6'2", about 300 pounds, but next to Shaquille O'Neal, right? I mean,
oh, sure. Yeah, I'm definitely skeptical on like I've heard like 40-foot tall or 400 feet tall or 4 miles high giants that we're talking about. I'm like, yeah, that's a load.
right.
I'm not, yeah, I definitely don't think that's what they're dealing with. But like Goliath size, where you're about 12 feet tall, I could see that.
Yeah, I mean, look, it's possible, certainly in
It's
the realm
possible.
of possibility, right? I mean, George Washington was described as a giant, right? He stood 6'2" for his time, and most guys were 5'9". Also, I think the term giant can have different connotations as well, right? We often look at, like, if somebody's really good in their business, he's a titan of industry. He's a giant in the industry.
Mhm.
And so I think those are terms that we have to realize are kind of loaded terms at times.
So, and the second critique I would have of interpreting angels coming with resurrected bodies, violating celestial laws, is I'm a believer that lineage is somewhat foreordained by covenant. And for a group of apostate angels who are resurrected to go to the earth and sire children, you're bringing spirits into the world through lineages that were not covenanted or planned. And I don't know how that works, and that would require revelation. Now I'm open. If that's true, God hasn't said how that works yet, and I will be totally open to hearing from the Lord how that worked, and that would be just fine. I just don't understand
Right.
how does people outside of the plan of God bring children into this world? What caliber or class of spirits does that bring? Um, in this Enoch literature, it's like these were actually demons, and to this day, because they got locked up in Tartarus, you know,
Right.
their spirits are the evil spirits that are on the earth. That's what Enoch said. The books of Enoch say about that, and that's the cause of evil.
Mm.
Okay, maybe that's the case, but to me, it's like introducing a virus into the computer program.
Right.
And maybe that's what happened, and maybe that's why God had to wipe things out with the flood and then the conquest of the promised land under Joshua. I don't or whatever. Yeah, I don't know, but that's one critique I have about that paradigm in general,
Right.
as it seems like that's pretty heavy. But since we're in it, we can address uh possible um we can address what might make it work.
Right.
So let's do that. Joseph Smith said, "The world and earth are not synonymous terms."
Oh, okay. Now
You know
we're
where I'm
getting into
going?
some stuff. Yeah.
So yeah, Second 30 says, "In answer to the question, is not the reckoning of God's time, angels' time, prophets' time, and man's time according to the planet on which they reside? I answer, yes, but there are no angels who minister to this earth, but those who do belong or have belonged to it." Joseph Smith also said, "The world and earth are not synonymous terms. The world is the human family. This earth was organized or formed out of other planets which were broke up and remodeled to make into the one on which we live." And that's from words of Joseph Smith on January 5th, 1841 in
Okay.
Basel. He also said, in remarking upon the opening verses of Genesis, he said, "In the translation where it says without form and void, it should read empty and desolate. The word created should be formed or organized." He also said on January 5th, 1841, "God did not make the earth out of nothing, for it is contrary to a rational mind and reason that something could be brought from a nothing. Also, it is contrary to the principle and means by which God does work. Also, this earth has been organized out of the portions of other globes that have been disorganized."
Interesting.
Very interesting. What are we to
Other worlds that have been disorganized.
Which we saw from Enoch earlier. Let's see if I can find it. I might have it actually later too.
I want to just for a moment, and this is where I think the first book of Enoch and Joseph Smith are so good together. I'll let you find it and read it, and then
Yeah, I got it. So he says in the last days that in the days of sinners, the heavenly bodies will begin to fall out of phase, and an evolving chaos will envelop the earth as both nature and humanity grow out of sync with their prescribed order. And in another place, Enoch sees that God has prepared a place in the cosmos for the punishment of rebellious stars, which deviated from God's timetable. So God is destroying stars
right.
who do not follow
Yep.
his ordained will.
Yep. This is where Joseph Smith and the Book of Enoch, this is where I really riff on this, right? Because if we just go back to that first part where Joseph Smith says the term world and what was it, earth, have two different connotations. That begins to open up a realm of possibilities that quite frankly are mind blowing.
Oh,
right?
huge.
Because if, as Joseph Smith says, the term world really means just the people who inhabit it, well, that leaves open the possibility that perhaps others inhabited it before Adam did.
Yep, we're gonna get there.
And this sort of thing, and this is why I this is just a theory. So if there's an archaeologist out there who wants to yell at me later, he can. But this is one of the reasons I wonder if they don't really dislike Joseph Smith. Because right now, as we speak, new things are being discovered that cause things to become older, right? Just as an example. Boy, I'm going down a weird rabbit hole now. Now you're going to get a look at what Dave reads in his spare time as well as gospel stuff. If you look at the base of the Sphinx, it is significantly older than the Sphinx that sits on top of it by thousands of years, pushing the dates back, clear back to
Are you familiar with the London Hammer?
Yes.
That one too?
Yep.
Do you know the dates on that one? I don't offhand.
I don't offhand.
That one's like, it's like, there used to be a date postulated like where the origin of humanity was, and this like predates that kind of a thing.
Yes. And then also, when you look at finds like Göbekli Tepe, which seem to have been buried on purpose, all of a sudden, human expansion. Well, I shouldn't say. Well, yeah, we can say human expansion and human fingerprints get way old.
Mm-hmm.
Now, we know that current archaeologists hate this, and now I'm going to start getting real nerdy. It upsets Clovis first, right? The model that the Clovis people were the first ones to hit America. They're the ones primarily responsible. That upends all of that. Well, if you got this guy out here in 18th century America, 19th century America, talking about the definition of worlds, things get a little spicy.
Very spicy for Christianity, which believed that the earth was created 6,000 years ago out of nothing.
Right.
And the pushback even to Mormonism, we have certain leaders in the church, like Joseph Fielding Smith Jr., who was definitely a believer of a strict, and I think this is emblematic of Mormonism generally speaking, is that there was no death before Adam. So how can any of this work?
Right.
Because it says Adam was the first flesh upon the earth, which means the first mortal, first to die.
Right.
Right. So how does that all work? Joseph Smith says above that it was desolate and empty, which to me that reads like it was destroyed and then started over. And so if you view it that way, then there's no contradiction.
Right. Right. And everything starts to piece together a little easier with the dates that they're finding as well.
Yeah, and we also have the scary thoughts from Malachi's promise, which says that this is still relatable. Joseph Smith says, "What are we to understand by this in the last days? In the days of Noah, God destroyed the world by a flood, and has promised to destroy it by fire in the last days. But before it took place, Elijah should come first and turn the hearts of the fathers to the children." Now comes the point. What is the office and work of Elijah? To make sure that that doesn't happen.
Right. Yep.
And this is where I get on my soapbox. I'll match you.
Okay.
I didn't really want to go here, but I have to.
Oh, it's too late. You know the name of the show. You're good.
All the temple work that the church is doing doesn't matter a damn. It doesn't matter a damn right now because they've changed the ordinances and they're not efficacious. And you and I, if we were to go through, if we hadn't been endowed and we went through, we were not making the same covenants that the pioneer generation made, we cannot be saved on the same laws and principles that they were covenanting to be under. We're not going to the same kingdom of glory.
Right.
And therefore, the earth will be utterly wasted. If our hearts, the hearts of the children, are not turned to the promises made to the fathers, the earth will be utterly wasted at my coming.
And I'll take it even a step backwards further. This doesn't begin in the temple. This has to begin by digging up your records, your family's records, right? I think a large portion, because I'm not a believer that the promise by Malachi is simply you're going to do their ordinance work. When he starts talking about the heart, he's talking about something different, right? So in doing your own genealogy, your own family history, there has to be a connection made.
Mm-hmm.
There has to be a love there that's involved to get to the heart. And the way that quite frankly, in an LDS temple, you just go in and draw a name.
It doesn't do it for you.
Doesn't do it.
No, and I don't dispute that at all. But I do know that Joseph Smith said that all men must be saved on the same principles. And he said that in connection with temple ordinances being revealed the same way from heaven. So if you change that, we're no longer being, according to Joseph Smith, we're no longer being saved according to the same principles as others.
Absolutely.
And that causes a no welding link, as Joseph Smith said. And it's all separate. And we're told that our hearts need to be made to the promises of the fathers, not the promises being made in our generation.
Right.
Our hearts need to be in the promises made to our fathers, which is the old endowment, the old doctrines, that's plural marriage, that's law of consecration. And if we do not do all those three things, the ordinances, plural marriage, and law of consecration, the promises made to the fathers to be saved on the same principles, then our earth is going to be destroyed. And I've seen this, it's all over in the Enoch literature about the stars being destroyed. It's when I was looking at Jewish Kabbalah stuff for the other lessons in the Zohar, I believe it says literally, and Moses says this, that worlds without number have passed away.
Right.
And the Zohar says that worlds are being destroyed all the time because God refuses to visit them.
Yep. Yep. And I was going to say it has a cascading effect, right?
Mhm.
It's not just a one boom, you're done. There's a cascading effect. Joseph Smith, I think, alludes to this when he says, when there's no change in ordinances, there's no change of priesthood.
But when there is a change in ordinances, there is a change in priesthood.
Exactly.
Is the corollary.
Right. And so you get a cascading event of disasters that
It is.
come by changing those
And that
ordinances.
fits with again, reading that again. The heavenly bodies fall out of phase in the days of the sinners, where humanity also grows out of sync, the same as the stars do with their prescribed
Yep.
order. And so, yeah, back to the church. The church thinks it's, oh, priesthood's been restored, follow the prophet, just go do your temple work once a month or whatever, whenever you can spare the time. And we got the keys and it's all good. But they never take this Malachi's promise in the light that I'm presenting it. And I want to really double down on how important that is, because what would it mean if what's being done in the temples in the LDS church were not being accepted by the Lord?
Right.
What does it mean now?
Yep. It means that we are up for that utter wasting.
Yep. Orson Hyde taught this too. He says, "The earth, you remember, was void and empty until our first parents began at the Garden of Eden. What does the term replenish mean? This word is derived from the Latin re and plenus. Re denotes repetition, iteration, and plenus signifies full, complete. Then the meaning of the word replenish is to refill, recomplete. Now go forth, says the Lord, and replenish the earth, for it was covered with gloomy clouds of darkness, excluded from the light of heaven, and darkness brooded upon the face of the deep. The world was peopled before the days of Adam, as much so as it was before the days of Noah. It was said that Noah became the father of a new world, but it was the same old world still, or same old earth, still to use that
Right.
term to substitute, and will continue to be, though it may pass through many changes. When God said, go forth and replenish the earth, it was to replenish the inhabitants of the human species and make it as it was before. Our first parents, then, were commanded to multiply and replenish the earth.
Ooh. Dude, there is so much there that I think I am in such a weird spot because there's so much I want to say, but I don't want to freak people out either.
I probably did that for you.
No, oh no, where I'm going is far bigger than that. We'll get into that maybe another time.
So, in support of all this, Orson F. Whitney, who was a grandson of Heber C. Kimball and Newell K. Whitney, said on August 19th, 1888, the prophet Joseph also declares that this earth is composed of the broken up fragments of other earths. But why were these other earths broken up and destroyed? Was it because they were disobedient and kept not the law? But now the Lord says that the earth obeys the celestial law, and therefore it shall be sanctified and made glorious, that those who have kept the celestial law may inherit it. These things are worth our serious consideration. If we fall short in our obedience and faithfulness, we are taking the terrible risk of being deprived of our eternal inheritance on this earth, which is to be our heaven. They who break the Sabbath are taking a course that perchance may enable the earth to rise up and testify against them and spurn them from its presence as unfit to dwell upon its glorified surface. So he addresses another key point to me, which is this earth, apparently, in section 76, I think, has a promise that it will be celestialized. We, however, don't have a promise that we'll be there.
Right.
And we don't, and if we don't quicken it, then it might just go through another round of creation. Like Orson Hyde says, we're undergoing one that's subsequent to the previous one. And it's just it's promised its ultimate exaltation for some reason. But
Okay.
does it need to wait until it has a people ready to live on it? We don't have to be that people if we don't live the way
Right.
that, yeah, if we're not fit to live there, we're not going to live there.
So let me ask you this question. We're told that the earth will be celestialized.
Mhm.
What does that mean then if you're an inhabitant of this earth, but then you fall into one of those other two kingdoms? Does that mean you still live on this earth?
I don't think so. You get kicked off to live somewhere else, the terrestrial or telestial world.
Perhaps. Okay, another thought. This part I might edit out. See, this is why I love Enoch and Joseph Smith, because this just it goes on forever. When you think of a kingdom, what do you think of?
I don't know. You got a king, you got a society, you got order, structure.
Okay, I like where you're going there. So often we tend to think of a kingdom in terms of geographical boundaries.
Sure.
Sometimes, though, I think a kingdom can be more about people who adhere to certain laws and ordinances. Perhaps it's less about geographical boundary and more about rights and privileges. And if that's the case, because we know it is said that those of the celestial world can go to the other 2 degrees.
Mm-hmm.
It's just that those in the other 2 degrees can't go to the celestial.
Mm-hmm.
So I've been wondering, is 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 it less about geographical location and more about rights and privileges?
Could be.
Just again, thoughts I have late at night when I can't sleep.
So let's get into nibbly on the Watchers. So we've dealt with apparent contradictions and apparent reconciliations, right? We've talked about, okay, maybe it is possible that angels from this earth, from a previous world, however, but still relative to this earth, could come and do
Right.
this, right? Nibley says finding apocalyptic writing at all in the Bible is amazing. And for those who don't know, apocalyptic just means revelation. Then suddenly they discovered that the whole thing is apocalyptic. All our scriptures here are apocalyptic. That means they are brought forth by times of pressure and crisis. They always come forth on the eve of great destructions. That's why they are given to us. Read the first section of the Doctrine and Covenants. Hearken, ye people of the earth. Therefore, ye people, fear and tremble. That's the theme. In verse 7 of the first chapter, wherefore, fear and tremble, O ye people. This is the message because these things always come when they are badly needed. When the world has been going wrong, when the world has been going the wrong way for a long time, and it is time to set things right again. But it's always accompanied by violent upheavals of nature and world upheavals, political, international, and everything else. We are going to get a lot of that here. We see it in the days of Adam, and we see it in the days of Enoch. This gets quite lively. You notice here the fierce anger is kindled from verse 27 following. I just noted some things here to be able to do it more rapidly. The difference from people from is that people are following their system. He says they are not following the system I gave them. I gave them a plan. I gave them instructions. They pay no attention to it. They think that they know better, and they are doing it their way. This is a constant theme in all this Enoch literature we put on the board last time. That is one of the great crimes. The classic theme that comes in here, and it usually comes a little later, is the Watchers. They had this crash program that begins here when Satan has great dominion and the gospel began to be preached. Holy angels were sent forth from the presence of God, and by his own voice and the gift of the Holy Ghost, and as prophets. In this crash program, they sent down angels to preach and put the people right. Now, this is a tradition that you will find spread everywhere, including in non Jewish sources at a very early time. These were the watchers, the agregori. They come down to observe and then went back to report as how things were going. They came down to instruct the human race and put them all back on the plan of the gospel again. But many of them, 200 of them according to tradition, fell away, were tempted by the daughters of men, joined with them, and sinned terribly. These were the terrible watchers. They knew too much, and that made them very dangerous. The watchers are responsible for a lot of trouble here. You're going to run into them all the time. We are told that they come down on top of Mount Hermon, the highest mountain in Palestine, which means mountain of the oath. 200 of them came down there and they took their oaths and covenants. They gave away the rights of the temple and they perverted them. The whole thing is a rite of perversion. They had the same things, but they perverted them and claimed that they were being holy, that they had the priesthood and that they had the covenants. This was their great crime, of course, that they had perverted the real thing. Fortunately, we are told that they didn't have enough knowledge. Their knowledge was limited, so they weren't able to destroy everything. Quote, they knew not the mind of God, end quote, as we are told in this book. So their system was not the system God gave Adam.
Mm. there's a lot to unpack there. And for as much as I love Nibley, and I love Nibley,
Me too.
there it's hard to tell when he is speculating himself and when he's just putting forward old literature.
Mhm.
And so I'm not 100% sure on what to make of all of that. How about you?
Um, I think it's reasonable. At the same time, we're dealing with we've seen several different interpretations of the Watchers thing go on, and so whether it's the sons of Cain or children of Cain offer like the oath thing is what's consistent. Like whether it's the sons of Cain administering oaths of darkness that God is pissed off at, or whether it's angels literally who are living in celestial glory breaking their oath by swearing an oath to go down, or whether it's by revealing temple oaths. It could be exclusive. It could be both at the same
Right.
time, and I could see that. And they're just doing their own counterfeit thing, just like Cain seemed to do with his own counterfeit gospel, which we were able to pretty well elucidate was happening. I think um, there, or it's just men, the earthly men apostatizing as well. I think the moral to get out of this generally is watch what oaths you're making and don't reveal sacred things to those who are not ready for it because that can be destructive.
So you're
That's
just
the moral.
yeah, you're just taking a good newscast, a good news reporter. We report, you decide, sort of a thing.
That's what I'm taking.
Yeah, yeah, no, that's probably a good safe place. Yeah, dude. To be honest with you, when you get to the Watchers, it's so I'm not sure we'll ever have a definitive answer on that until till the hereafter. But I think there's wisdom to be taken from no matter which camp you want to espouse on this.
Absolutely, there is.
And so that's what I'd say. Study all the camps, right? Take all the knowledge you can from this and apply it where it needs to be.
I absolutely agree with that. Let's see. We also have an interesting reversal too of what is what became like the idea and interpretation um, that's made popular by Jerome of that it's just men, but we see a reversal of that actually in the book of Moses, where it says in chapter 8, verse 13 through 15, it says, Noah and his sons, but this is different, right? Noah and his sons hearkened unto the Lord and gave heed, and they were called the sons of God. And when these men began to multiply on the face of the earth, and daughters were born unto them, and the sons of men saw that those daughters were fair, and took them wives, even as they chose. And the Lord said unto Noah, the daughters of thy sons have sold themselves. For behold, my anger is kindled against the sons of men, for they will not hearken unto my voice. So this is obviously different than what Enoch is saying about the giants, because we read earlier that there was giants in the land in the days of Enoch, and that seems to go with the Watchers and the Agrigory. But then, Noah is the great grandson of Enoch, and his granddaughters marry outside the covenant and the
Oh,
sons of men, and that did not make the Lord happy
right.
either. So you have a reversal as well going on later down the road, where it's not the sons of God marrying the daughters of men, but the daughters of the sons of God marrying the sons of men.
Phew. It's all jacked up.
It was getting all jacked up. Anyway, just something interesting to note. Okay, next section. Switching topics, kind of.
Okay.
Back to the Pearl of Great Price. Enoch's interaction with the Lord, who, and I don't just mean the Lord he's been talking to, but actually, I think that there's some Adam God stuff in here that's overlooked, and I
Nice.
think he's actually talking to Adam as the Ancient of Days at certain points.
Okay.
Because if we go back, right? So let's see. Adam's ascension to heaven was 122 years before the city of Enoch left, right? So
Okay.
there's a 122-year period at the end of Enoch's life where Adam's in heaven, where he could have resumed his position as God,
Yep.
right? So Moses 7:17 through 19, this is around the time period that the city of Enoch is actually being caught up, I believe. It says, the fear of the Lord was upon all nations, and so great was the glory of the Lord, which was upon his people. And the Lord blessed the land, and they were blessed upon the mountains and upon the high places, and did flourish. And the Lord called his people Zion, because they were one heart and one mind, and dwelt in righteousness, and there was no poor among them. And Enoch continued in his preaching and righteousness unto the people of God. And it came to pass in his days he built a city that was called a city of holiness, even Zion. And it came to pass that Enoch looked, and from Noah he beheld. So he's, as they're being caught up, he's seeing the future,
Right.
right? And from Noah he beheld all the families of the earth, and he cried unto the Lord, saying, when shall the day of the Lord come? When shall the blood of the righteous be shed, that all they all they that mourn may be sanctified and have eternal life? And the Lord said, it shall be in the meridian of time. So Enoch, as the city is being lifted up, is
Right.
having a dialogue with God, and he's asking, when's Christ going to come? God answers that in the meridian of time. And then it follows that Enoch saw the day of the coming of the Son of Man, even in the flesh, and his soul rejoiced, saying, the righteous is lifted up, and the Lamb is slain from the foundation of the world. And then it gets interesting. And he called unto the Lord, saying, wilt thou not come again upon the earth? For as much as thou art God, and I know thee, and thou hast sworn unto me, and commanded me that I should ask in the name of thine only begotten, thou hast made me and given me a right unto thy throne, not of myself, but through thine own grace. Wherefore I ask thee if thou wilt not come again on the earth.
Okay, so he right there he says,
In the name, you've asked me to ask you in the name of your only begotten, and I'm asking you
are you
in
going to come
again.
again?
So he's not talking to Christ. He's talking exactly. He's talking to a God, saying, inasmuch as you are God and I know you, and again, they knew each other.
Yep.
If this God is Adam, they knew each other for well, all of Enoch's life, 365 years. And he's asking, are you gonna, and he's been gone, God's been, if he's Adam, he's been gone for 122 years. Are you gonna come back
Again,
again?
right?
And he says, the Lord said unto Enoch, as I live, even so I will come in the last days, in the days of wickedness and vengeance, to fulfill the oath which I have made unto you.
And see, there's so much there,
There
especially
is.
when you start unpacking the Ancient of Days stuff in Daniel, and
That's what I
then
got next.
and then when you go and you unpack Revelations, right? And it talks about Michael being the one who vanquishes Lucifer,
Mm-hmm.
right? All of a sudden, you're looking at the return of two gods, Jesus Christ and God the Father himself.
Yep.
And now and if you're going to say that God the Father is coming as well, which it says there in the Pearl of Great Price,
Mm-hmm.
you then have to give credence to the word again.
There's the word again, and also in the days of wickedness and vengeance. Remember that.
Right.
Because in Daniel 7, it says, I saw in the night visions, and behold, one like the Son of Man came with the clouds of heaven, and came to the Ancient of Days, and brought him near before him, the Ancient of Days. And there was given him dominion, glory, and a kingdom. And all people, nations, and languages should serve him. His dominion is an everlasting dominion, etc. And then in chapter 12, it says, and at that time shall Michael stand up, the great prince which standeth for the children of thy people, and there shall be a time of trouble such as never was. So, in the days of wickedness and vengeance, and Daniel says that Michael will stand up and the Ancient of Days will come at a time of trouble such as never was. So, that's rhetorically connected.
Yep.
Big time.
Yep.
Furthermore, in like First Enoch chapter 14, Enoch is talking to the Ancient of Days, and he's the one that's telling Enoch, I'm going to send the flood. And so we're dealing with a conversation in the Pearl of Great Price that's literally preceding the flood, and he's
Right.
seeing Noah and the flood, and then the rest of the history of the world. And then in the book of Enoch, Enoch's in dialogue with the Ancient of Days. It's in a very similar conversation.
Right.
And the Ancient of Days saying, I'm going to send the flood. You know, any Latter day Saint should take very seriously Ancient of Days stuff in other literature, because Christians and Jews knew that was God,
Both, yes.
and Joseph Smith said that was Adam.
Yep. Yep, absolutely. And if I'm not mistaken, there's some Christians who actually hypothesize the Ancient of Days being Adam.
Yep, I've heard that. I've heard Abel, and I've heard
Yep.
the Son of Man is presented as being Abel too, like vice versa. Sometimes it's Enoch.
Right.
But yeah, but no, I have heard that.
And so, like, all of a sudden, Adam God starts to pop in restoration scriptures, and that's huge, right? And it's so subtle, right? So subtle.
Oh,
But if you understand it, if you understand Adam God, if you understand Ancient of Days, Michael's role in Revelation, this stuff starts to come forward.
so I skipped over it earlier. Back when we were talking about Metatron and Shaddai,
Yeah,
there's other books that mention Metatron that's not Books of Enoch. Like
right,
there's like a 7th century Jewish text called the Apocalypse of Zerubbabel. Zerubbabel was the temple architect in the
right,
so it's attributing stuff to him pseudepigraphically, right?
right.
But in that Metatron is Michael, and so you're now basically dealing with the connection of Metatron, Shaddai, the name of God, and Michael all being wrapped into the one there.
That's potent.
Yeah, this is interesting.
Oh,
So we talked a little bit about how impossible it is for Joseph Smith to have had access to
right.
the records, right? Well, I have another approach to this too, that validates it. It's not an apologetic tactic I've heard used before.
Okay.
And so I thought it was interesting. But in any case, in if you go through teachings of Joseph Smith, which I consider like a fifth standard work, it's basically scripture in my
Sure.
opinion.
Yeah, I think so. Because I mean, look, there was work both its predecessor words of Joseph Smith, as well as the teachings of the prophet Joseph Smith. Those were verified pretty well,
Oh yeah,
right?
no, they're huge. Yeah,
Those weren't just,
yeah.
hey, some dude remembered him saying this.
No, teachings has a gloss or two that come to mind. The biggest one, in my opinion, is like what people critiquing our position say, like, or assuredly that anyone who rises against the church, while he's saying that they are out of the way while he himself is righteous, he's on the high road to apostasy. That like we have no original source quote for that.
Right.
Adjacent to that idea is where he says, "Hearken ye 12 and ye elders, any man who betrays his brethren, know that he's on a high road to apostasy."
Right.
Betrays the brethren, right? Is what it says
Okay.
in the teachings.
Okay.
That's a gloss, and it doesn't say that in the original account, which comes from Wilford Woodruff, which the original quote from Wilford Woodruff that he wrote down in his journal, and you can go look this up because it's all online. He's Joseph Smith says, and this is a paraphrase, but I'm thinking it's a very good close paraphrase. He says, "Hearken ye 12 and all ye elders, do not betray the revelations that God has given to you, whether they be in the Book of Mormon, the Doctrine and Covenants, the Bible, or any other revelations that he may give to you, and do not betray your brethren."
Hmm. That reads differently.
Yeah, not the brethren, not the hierarchy, but don't betray your brethren and don't betray the revelations.
Right.
That's the mark of apostasy, is betraying the revelations and betraying your brethren.
Whew.
In any case, he goes on, and when he's talking about Paul, and he says in the Epistle of Hebrews that Paul's, he's ascribing the authorship of Hebrews to Paul, and he says that when he says that the blood of Christ has made a better atonement than the blood of Abel, for offerings for sin or whatever. Well, Joseph then ruminates and says, well, how does Paul know so much about Abel? Because and there's like one or two instances, and he says, well, because Abel ministered to him.
Interesting.
And then he also, I think he says the same thing about Jude and Enoch. And he says that, because Jude says in the one chapter epistle that he says quite bluntly, he says, and from the seventh from Adam, we know this prophecy. And then let's see, do I have it? I think I do have it here. No, I don't, but I'll just pull it up. Hold that thought. No, I do. It was also these that Enoch, the 7th generation from Adam, prophesied, saying, see, the Lord is coming with 10,000s of his holy ones to execute judgment on all, and to convict everyone of all the deeds of ungodliness that they have committed in such an ungodly way, and of all the harsh things that the ungodly sinners have spoken against him. And so, first off, Enoch's quoting Daniel type literature about the Ancient of Days,
Right.
10,000s or millions or whatever the various translations. Many, a multitude of angels are attending the Ancient of Days when he comes. But Enoch, he's quoting Enoch here, saying that the day will come that 10,000, the Lord with 10,000 or many of his holy ones will come. And so Joseph Smith's like, well, how did Jude
How
know?
do you know? Yeah.
Enoch talked to him.
Mm.
And so Joseph Smith wasn't. Oh, you're fine. Joseph Smith wasn't taking the scholarly approach now, saying, because now we know Jude is actually quoting the first book of Enoch.
Right.
Joseph Smith's not saying, "Oh, well, how did Jude know? He had the book of Enoch. He
Right.
didn't even know about it." And so for me, the point I'm getting across here is that's a very convoluted red heifer or red herring. Sorry.
Freudian slip.
Yeah, that's a very convoluted red herring to throw out
Right.
there to people if he had supposedly had access to these Enochian records
Right.
that he himself was copying, saying, "Oh, how did Jude know that what Enoch said? Oh, he must have talked to him when he himself had the book of Enoch and was quoting from it in the book of Moses." Yeah, right. You
Yeah.
think that's likely? No, so we have Joseph Smith admitting that he didn't even know that there was a book of Enoch, essentially, right? There
Right.
in the teachings, in his own words, he didn't know that there was a book of Enoch that Jude was
Ooh.
quoting from. So there you go.
Oh,
You like that?
It gets better. It just continues to get better.
Yeah. Yeah, I've never heard anyone
No.
tackle that angle.
No, but that's it's kind of game set match, right?
I think so. But here's what Enoch says, the book of Enoch. So I'll read Jude again, then I'll read Enoch. Jude says, "It was also about these that Enoch in the seventh generation from Adam prophesied, saying, See, the Lord is coming with 10,000 of his holy ones to execute judgment on all and to convict everyone of all the deeds of ungodliness that they have committed in such an ungodly way, and of all the harsh things that ungodly sinners have spoken against him." Enoch says, "Behold, he comes with myriads of his holy ones to execute judgment on all and to destroy the wicked and to convict all flesh for all the wicked deeds that they have done and the proud and hard words that wicked sinners spoke against him." That's on the money.
Ooh, yeah.
That's nearly verbatim.
Yep, absolutely it is. I'm sure he's just a good guesser. I wouldn't read into that too much, Michael.
So, some other fun stuff for proving Joseph Smith being inspired or a really good guesser, as Dave puts it. Abinadi alludes to Enoch.
Really?
It's not a direct quote. It's not as good as a direct quote as the last one. But like we covered earlier, okay, it looks like some of the first books of Enoch were written about 300 BC. Well, if this is true, if Abinadi is quoting it, that means fragments of it were actually on the brass plates and are actually older.
Oh, much older.
600 BC at
Yeah.
least, right?
Yeah, at least.
At least.
Right? That's the best case scenario, because 600 would have been about the time that Nephi would have got the plates.
Yep. So they had to already been on there. And so, or they're coming from direct revelation to Abinadi, I guess.
Right.
Maybe. But I'm going to go with the brass plates thing. Anyway, Abinadi says, when he's preaching to King Noah, he says, "And it shall come to pass that I will smite this people with sore afflictions, yea, with famine and with pestilence. And it shall come to pass that I will send forth hail among them, and it shall smite them, and they shall also be smitten with the east wind, and insects shall pester their land also and devour their grain." And First Enoch 76, 5 and 10 says, this alludes to the storehouse idea that contains the elements. But the east wind comes forth through the first portal or storehouse, which is in the east. From it comes forth desolation, drought, heat, and destruction. And after these, the north winds from the seventh portal in the east come dew and rain, locust and desolation. So Enoch is saying that the east wind brings desolation, drought, heat, and destruction, and then comes rain, locust, and desolation.
Okay.
And Abinadi saying famine, pestilence, the east wind, and insects will pester your land and devour their grain. So that's all the hallmarks associated with the east wind. Yeah, coming from the storehouses of heaven. that Enoch saw.
So yeah, chances are he's quoting directly from the Book of Enoch.
Alluding or paraphrasing too, but yes, it's not super tight, but the imagery is extremely
enough.
consistent. It's tight enough, but it gets better because Samuel the Lamanite does quote.
Really?
Yeah.
All right, let's see it.
Samuel the Lamanite, when he's on the wall giving his dissertation to the Nephites who are
Mhm.
wicked, and it makes sense because prophets do this all the time. You see Amos and Isaiah, and I think there's another one, Micah. Amos, Isaiah, and Micah all say the same thing. It's in the last days, the mountain of the Lord's house shall be established in the top of the mountains. They all say
Right.
that, and we don't know who's quoting who said it first. They're all about the same time period. We don't know who said it for. Are they all quoting Isaiah or is Amos first? We don't know, but they all put it in there. So prophets do that. They quote each other a lot.
Dude, Christ quoted the prophets when he was repelling the temptations by the
Mhm.
adversary. He quotes
Yep.
Deuteronomy and
Yep.
Exodus.
Yep. Yeah, absolutely. And so Samuel the Lamanite says, "And behold, a curse shall come upon the land, saith the Lord of hosts, because of this people's sake who are upon the land, yea, because of their wickedness and their abominations. And it shall come to pass, saith the Lord of hosts, yea, our great and true God, that whoso shall hide up treasures in the earth shall find them again no more, because of the great curse of the land, save he be a righteous man and shall hide it up to the Lord." He
Hmm.
also says, "Behold ye the people of this great city, and hearken unto my words, yea, hearken unto the words which the Lord saith. For behold, he saith, Ye are cursed because of your riches, and also are your riches cursed, because ye have set your hearts upon them, and have not hearkened unto the words of him who gave them to you. You do not remember the Lord your God and the things which he has blessed you, but you do always remember your riches, not to thank the Lord your God for them. Yea, your hearts are not drawn out unto the Lord, but they do swell with great pride unto boasting, and unto great swellings, envyings, strifes, malice, persecutions, and murders, and all manner of iniquities. For this cause has the Lord God caused that a curse shall come upon the land, and also upon your riches, and this because of your iniquities." Enoch says, and he's saying to those in the maybe it's in his day or those in the last days, I don't recall, but he says, "Woe unto you, ye rich, for ye have trusted in your riches, and from you your riches shall ye depart." So
Ha! That's
you're
a direct quote.
Yeah, because ye have not remembered the Most High that
Oh,
in the days of your riches. That is the state.
verbatim.
Yeah, in the days of your riches, you have not remembered the Most High, and your riches are going to be slippery.
Yep.
That's what Samuel says, but he says your riches shall depart from you.
Yep.
Enoch says. He also goes and says, "Woe unto you who acquire silver and gold in unrighteousness, for your riches shall not abide, but speedily ascend from you, and ye shall be given over to a
Holy
great
cow.
curse." So
Yeah.
a supernatural slant is being given by Enoch that your riches will ascend from you or depart from you
Yeah. Ooh.
because they do not remember the Lord in the
Yeah.
days of their riches.
So it's
Direct. It is direct.
direct. Yep. Ooh.
Let's see. Do I have what Christ? Do I have all the things that Christ quoted? There's like, so first off, um, some people do think Christ quoted Enoch as well. In fact, he nimbly said that the book of Enoch is quoted 128 times in the New Testament.
Whoa.
But when the Pharisees or scribes come to him and ask him, um, if a woman marries seven men, who is she in who does she belong to in the resurrection? And Christ says, "Do you not know that they'd be like the angels and they don't marry?"
Right.
That's like a kind of an illusion almost
Yeah.
to what we saw about the Watchers, that you
Right.
shouldn't do that. Uh,
Right.
and
Yeah.
Orson Pratt would say his apologetic to that, because it's been a big criticism from sectarian Christianity against Mormonism, is you believe you can be married in heaven. Orson Pratt said, "Yeah, but our marriages aren't done in heaven; they're done on earth and
Right.
sealed for heaven."
Right. Ooh.
And so Christ is possibly alluding to the Book of Enoch there.
Right.
Um, he says also, um, oh boy, where was it? Second Enoch 49, 1 through 3 says, "I swear to you, my children, But I swear not by an oath, neither by heaven nor by earth, nor by any other creatures which God has created. The Lord said, there is no oath in me, nor in justice, but truth. If there is no truth in men, let them swear by the words yea, yea, or else nay, nay. So that's
So he's quoting Enoch.
on the Sermon on the Mount. Yeah.
Oh,
And he also quotes Enoch in when he's talking about Judas being the son of perdition, and he says it would be better for him never to have been born. That phrase is also in Enoch as well. That it would be better for
holy
them
cow.
never, those who depart from the truth once they had it, it would be better for them not to be born.
Wow.
Yeah.
Holy cow. So it's good enough for the Savior.
It's good enough for the Savior. First Enoch, anyways.
Fascinating.
And First Enoch prophesies of the Book of Mormon coming forth.
Okay, let's hear it.
Enoch says, and now I know this mystery, that sinners will alter and pervert the words of righteousness in many ways, and will speak wicked words and lie, and practice great deceits, and write books concerning their words. But when they write down truthfully all my words in their languages, and do not change or minish aught from my words, but write them down all truthfully, all that I first testified concerning them, then I know another mystery, that books will be given to the righteous, and the wise to become a cause of joy and uprightness and much wisdom. And to them shall books be given, and they shall believe in them and rejoice over them. And then shall the righteous who have learnt learned therefrom all the paths of uprightness be recompensed.
Ooh. That might not just be the Book of Mormon either. That could be
The restoration
the
of Pearl of Great
Restoration
Price.
Scriptures. Yeah.
Yep.
Holy cow. That's fascinating.
Mm-hmm.
And all of a sudden, Enoch starts taking on more importance,
I think so.
right? If several Book of Mormon prophets are quoting him, or if Christ is quoting him, if Enoch is talking about latter-day revelation and latter-day scripture, that's huge. That's huge.
It is huge.
It also continues to show the continuity of a plan that Joseph said has been in place forever.
Yeah, it's literally prophesying and foretelling a restoration. Which, okay, if it didn't come through Joseph Smith, who's it going to come through?
Right. Nobody else has made that claim.
No, and the fact that the Book of Mormon quotes it coming from Joseph Smith too, it's like the two things are just testifying of each other.
Yep, absolutely.
So we're nearing the end here, but some fun things from the Book of
No,
Enoch.
you're good.
In First Enoch chapter 10, Michael the archangel is the one that binds the Watchers into hell. So that harkens back to the imagery of Michael conquering the devil.
Yep.
Being in charge of that whole scenario.
Right.
In Enoch 14, verse 22, you see the imagery of the Ancient of Days. So Enoch is seeing the same thing that Daniel's seeing. In Enoch 20, this says that Michael the archangel is over the best of men, and he's over chaos. So also an interesting theme. First Enoch 25 gives tree of life and temple imagery. This is interesting. It says, and he said unto me, Enoch, why dost thou ask me regarding the fragrance of the tree, and why dost thou wish to learn the truth? Then I answered him, saying, I wish to know about everything, but especially about this tree. And he answered, saying, this is Raphael, I believe, talking to him, this high mountain which thou hast seen, whose summit is like the throne of God, is his throne, where the holy great one, the Lord of glory, the eternal King, will sit, and when he shall come down to visit the earth with goodness. And as for this fragrant tree, no mortal is permitted to touch it till the great judgment, when he shall take vengeance on all and bring everything to its consummation forever. It shall then be given to the righteous and holy. Its fruit shall be food for the elect. It shall be transplanted to the holy place, to the temple of the Lord, the eternal King. Then shall they rejoice with joy and be glad. And into the holy place shall they enter, and its fragrance shall be in their bones, and they shall live long on the earth. So that is stark temple imagery.
Yep.
And it harkens to the revelation of John at the end of the New Testament, where the tree of life is in the New Jerusalem, which its architecture is identical to the Holy of Holies of the temple with the
Right.
perfect
Yep.
cube. The temple in Solomon's temple was, I want to say, 10 cubits high. I don't know.
Right.
Um, maybe it was 20, but 10 cubits cubed all the way around. So a
Right.
perfect cube. Um, the New Jerusalem John sees is 1,500 miles cubed.
Ooh.
But the tree of life is there, and we know that the tree of life was a relic or something. The menorah
Right.
representing the tree of life was a relic in the Holy of Holies,
Yep.
and so this is temple literature that Enoch is seeing. It's the restoration of the temple, and when we realize, also we talked about how First Enoch was something that was held to by people like the Essenes, who are temple exiles,
Right.
priest exiles. They're looking forward to the restoration of the temple
Yes.
in its true sense in the last days. That's what they're seeing here
Okay.
and writing about.
Who in there seeing that in Enoch?
Hmm.
Wow.
And that's what John is saying is going to happen too. It's the restoration of the
Mouth
temple.
of 2 or 3 witnesses.
Yep.
Absolutely.
In First Enoch 32, the tree of knowledge of good and evil is called simply the tree of wisdom. So we dealt with the tree of life a second ago, but Enoch says, "How beautiful is the tree, and how attractive is its look." Then Raphael, the holy angel who was with me, answered and said, "This is the tree of wisdom, of which thy father of old and thy aged mother, who were before thee, have eaten, and they learned wisdom, and their eyes were opened, and they knew that they were naked, and were driven out of the garden." So I just like that tree of
Yeah.
wisdom.
Yep. Absolutely. Absolutely. I think that's much better.
Hmm. First Enoch 46, the Ancient of Days, they call him the Head of Days in this, but and he says, "And I saw one who had a head of days, and his head was like wool, and with him was another being whose countenance had the appearance of a man, and his face was full of graciousness, like one of the holy angels. And I asked the angel who went with me, and showed me all the hidden things concerning that Son of Man, who he was, and whence he was, and why he went with a head of days. And he answered and said unto me, This is the Son of Man, who hath righteousness, with whom dwelleth righteousness, and who revealeth all the treasures of that which is hidden, because the Lord of spirits has chosen him, and whose lot hath the preeminence before the Lord of spirits and uprightness forever." And he goes on to talk about how the Son of Man was named in the presence of the Lord of spirits, even before the sun and the constellations were created, and before the stars of heaven were made. So the Son of Man was named before all of that. Uh, he sees stuff. It's all Daniel 7 imagery. And in those days, I saw the head of days sit down on the throne of his glory, and the books of the living were opened in front of him, and all of his host, which dwell in the heavens above, and his council were standing in front of him. And so this goes all the way back to the books that we talked
Right.
about at the very beginning of the podcast,
Right.
the books of the records of Adam, and Adam and Seth and Enoch all writing, right? The things that we're going to be judged out of. Uh, and at that hour, the Son of Man was named in the presence of the Lord of spirits. And in those days, the chosen one will sit on his throne, the head of days. And all the secrets of wisdom will flow out from the counsel of his mouth, for the Lord of spirits hath appointed him and glorified him.
True. That is all Daniel stuff, isn't it?
Mhm. In First Enoch's chapter 65, it's the book of Noah in the book of Enoch. We see Noah crying out to Enoch, who's already ascended into heaven. He's gone.
Right.
Noah is crying out to Enoch 3 times in prayer, with his arms outstretched.
Right. Familiar.
Yeah, familiar. Um, and he says, "Ruin is accomplished because the angels have revealed the mysteries. They have no place of repentance forever, because they have shown them what was hidden, and they are damned. But as for thee, my son," that's Enoch speaking to Noah, "the Lord of spirits knows that thou art pure and guiltless of this reproach concerning the secrets." So that insinuates that there's some temple stuff
Yep.
being revealed
Yep.
there. And then in response, Noah gets a book of secrets from Enoch, who he's given heavenly books from Enoch during this dialogue. Um, Also, the author of the first Enoch ascribes that the Watchers were the first people to show. They were the first to show people how to commit abortions.
Oh, you have that?
I don't have the verse here, but I just have the footnote in my notes here. I mean,
Really?
I could try to look for it. If you,
Yeah,
yeah, okay, I'll pull it up.
because this one's near and dear to my heart.
I know it is. That's why I brought it up, and it is to me too.
Yep.
So they're talking about the different princes of the 200 angels, and he says, and the fifth was Kasdeha. This is he who showed the children of men all the wicked smitings of spirits and demons, and the smitings of the embryo in the womb, that it may pass away, and the smitings of the soul, the bites of the serpent, and the smitings which befall through the noontide heat, the son of the serpent named Tabet. So yeah, the smitings
Ooh.
of the embryo in the womb.
Okay. So a couple things jump out to me here. First off, when do we figure First Enoch was written 300 BC?
But between the different fragments were written between 300 and the first century BC.
That's awfully early to be understanding a fertilized egg as an embryo.
That's true.
That's awfully early, which means that knowledge was definitely handed down.
Okay.
That speaks to the veracity. The other thing I'll say is that if they had an understanding of the embryo, all of a sudden you have a time frame in which you're working with on when it's quote acceptable.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm not seeing very much wiggle room there, like moment of conception kind of stuff. The other thing I'll say is that when you start talking about abortion, you're now dealing with a much more ancient evil.
Yeah.
And for some reason, the more ancient it is, the darker it feels.
Mm-hmm.
That's fascinating stuff.
I think so too.
And if that's one of the sins that caused God to be like, flood it,
Yep.
flood it.
Yeah, and that means we're near for a burning in our world.
Well,
He won't flood
yeah,
it again, so it's gonna be burning this time.
yeah. And look, there's a pattern set in the Old Testament. Every time
Mm-hmm.
the children of Israel start screwing around with Baal and his pantheons, crap goes sideways, right? You can bet destruction's at the door. And God being no respecter of persons, I would expect the same thing on our end.
So around this time too, that the angels are leaving heaven and they're making their oath to go, uh, you know, to do what they're doing. One of the angels is appointed, I guess, to go talk to Michael, and they ask him to reveal a hidden name associated with an oath. And it says that the power of the oath was in the hand of Michael, and through that oath brought forth creation and governed creation.
Ooh.
And so actually I think I have the whole thing here. And this one told the holy Michael that he should show him the secret name so that they might mention it in the oath, so that those who showed the sons of men everything that is secret trembled before that name and oath. And this is the power of that oath, for it is powerful and strong. And he placed this oath in charge, meaning God, placed this oath in the charge of the holy Michael. And these are the secrets of this oath, and they are strong through this oath. And heaven was suspended before the world was created, and forever through the oath.
Right.
And through it the earth was founded upon the water, and from the hidden recesses of the mountains come beautiful waters, and from the creation of the world and forever. And through that oath the sea was created, and its foundation. For the time of anger he placed it for it the sand, and it does not go beyond it, from the creation of the world and forever. And through that oath the deeps were made firm, and they stand and do not move from their place, and the creation of the world from the creation of the world and forever. And through that oath the sun and the moon complete their course, and do not transgress their command, from the creation of the world and forever. And through that oath the stars complete their course, and he calls their names, and they answer him, from the creation of the world and forever. And so the angels are asking Michael to reveal certain things so that they can do other certain things.
Right.
So yeah, just interesting.
Ugh. Can't
And
wait to get the full backstory.
yeah, and Michael the Archangel has got the oath that's got the power of creation
Right, right.
and the name associated with the
Yeah,
oath.
yeah.
In Enoch 71, Enoch is traveling through the seven heavens and Michael's the guide. And so Michael takes him into the, into the highest
Right.
place, and so that's cool. Um, let's see. First Enoch 99, also talking about the Watchers revealing secrets. He says, "Woe unto them that pervert the words of uprightness and transgress the eternal law, and transform them into what they are not." Um, it's interesting to note here too that the angels who went and made this oath to break their oaths that they had made, allegedly, did so seemingly like they thought that the Lord would forgive them, because like the Lord forgives, right? That's what he
Right.
does. You repent. That's part of the gospel. And so they ask Enoch. A lot of the dialogue is, when after Enoch's traveling through the stars and the heavens and stuff like that, um, the Lord sends him to go talk to the Watchers who are in hell, essentially, and they ask Enoch to intercede on their behalf. Like, can you ask the Lord to forgive us?
Mm,
We'll repent. Like it was premeditated. But yeah, it just shows you that there's some things you can't come back from that are
right.
taken very seriously.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah.
And revealing those things, holy things, are kind of one of them.
You mean like stuff in the temple?
Yeah, stuff that used to have penalties, but they don't longer have
They don't
penalties.
have any, right. Weird.
Yeah, yeah.
Huh.
It was a big deal to the Lord, is what I'm saying.
Yeah, yeah. I mean,
In Enoch 20, second Enoch, we're in second Enoch. I found this interesting. 22 verse 8. And the Lord said to Michael, to go and take Enoch from out of his earthly garments and anoint him with my sweet ointment and put him in the garments of my glory.
hmm.
Second Enoch 31 3. And he was continually in paradise. And the devil understood that I wanted to create another world because Adam was Lord on earth to rule and control it. And so they're talking about the
Right.
Satan's interloping, right? And God is telling Enoch that Satan knew I was creating another world, and so he was trying to mess up the program. So the fact that there's other worlds, and
There's
there have
so
been other,
much
that's huge.
in these last little bits. What we're getting is a ton of temple imagery
Yeah.
that should leave little to the imagination of the initiated.
Yes. Very little. Second Enoch 33 verse 5. Um, God talks to Enoch about the destruction of creation, like we talked about, the destruction
Right.
of a world. He says, "If I turn away my face, then all things will be destroyed."
Ooh.
Which goes back to the Zohar, where God doesn't. If God decides for some reason, I don't know if it was ever, where when I was reading it, it didn't elucidate what the reasons were. But if God does not go visit those worlds, they're destroyed.
Yeah.
Which goes
Yeah.
back to Malachi's promise to me.
Well, and this is interesting too in the sense of what we do as a people, right? Because my contention is that for a long while now, America and certainly the world has tried to throw God out. You know, whether he doesn't visit us of his own accord or we just say we don't want him here.
There's some of that.
The end result is the same no matter what.
Yeah, that's very true. This is kind of fun. Second Enoch 33:11 gives a funky name to Michael, but it's cool when you break it down. He says to Enoch, "I will give to you, Enoch, my intercessor, the archistrategy, Michael, for the handwriting of your fathers, Adam, Seth, Enos, Canaan, Mahalalel, and Jared, your father." So he's saying he's going to give the writings of all these holy men into the custody of Michael, but he gives him this weird name, the archistrategy. And so I broke that down. Arch is obviously chief, primary,
Right.
or first. Um, but the other words, strategy is like general or military leader. Well, that's
Mm,
just fascinating to me because, and this is like I said earlier, like I want to write a paper on the intersection of like Mormon fundamentalism belief in Adam God and like Second Temple Judaism and Michael being the
right.
intercessor of God. Because, okay, what does Joshua say in the book or about Michael or about when they're going to go take Jericho and level it? He sees a man with an armor and drawn sword,
Right.
and this man says, "Take your shoes off, for you're standing on holy
Holy ground.
ground."
Yep.
And he worships him, and he says, "Who are you?" And he says, "I am captain of the Lord's host." And then Joshua says, "The captain of the Lord's host is the Lord."
Right.
And
Right.
so,
And so again, drawing another parallel
to Michael
right
being the
back.
captain of the
Yep.
Lord's host is the Lord.
Ah,
That's right there.
yep. Absolutely. Wow.
Let's see. This is cool too. This is a very Christ-like teaching, but this is in Second Enoch 45. Enoch tells his sons after he's ascended to heaven and come back down, and he's telling his sons, I'm gonna be gone forever. I'm gonna dwell up on high, right? And he says that the Lord doesn't want sacrifices of bread, candles, or the flesh of beasts, but the sacrifice that he wants are the pure hearts of men.
Interesting, drawing parallels to that broken heart and contrite
Yeah, that
spirit.
Christ talks about in Third Nephi.
Right.
Yeah.
Whew.
Back to the books imagery, Second Enoch 47. Take these heavenly books of your father's handwriting and read them, for the books are many, and in them you will learn all of the Lord's works, all that has been from the creation, and all that will be till the end of time. Thus I make known unto you, my children, and distribute the books to your children into all your generations, and amongst the nations who shall have the sense to fear God, let them receive them. And may they come to love them more than any food or earthly sweets, and read them and apply themselves to them.
Talking about scripture, I assume. And
Yep. And Second Enoch 52, there's a straight up beatitude type format given that also harkens to the Sermon on the Mount. Um, Blessed is he who keeps the foundations of his fathers, made from the beginning. Cursed is he who perverts the decrees of his forefathers.
now that's interesting because right now I'm listening to a book and I can't remember who the author is, but basically, and it was called In the Language of Adam.
I'm reading that too. Yeah.
And it basically makes the case that perhaps the Sermon on the Mount
His temple ordinances.
is temple ordinances. Now, I'm not sure how much weight I'm willing to put into it
I'm
yet.
I'm a big fan of that book.
Okay.
Yeah.
I haven't got all the way through it yet.
I haven't
But
either.
what's interesting is that when you go to get to the yay, yay, nay, nay part, that's very temple oriented.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. And so that's just one excerpt, but yeah, in that chapter and around it, it's always blessed are they who do this, blessed are they. And Enoch is telling his children that as
Right.
he's returned down from heaven before he goes back up again, and cursed are they who do this. And
Yep.
it very much is the beatitude type format.
Yep. Absolutely.
Let's see. In Second Enoch, when Enoch ascends to heavens and is, you know, when that business is done and he's left, Methuselah builds an altar or a temple at the site,
Right.
which I thought was cool. And then Methuselah dresses up as a king with beautiful garments and prays at the altar that they had built. And others of his sons and grandsons form a circle around him, and he raises his hands up to heaven praying.
Where have I seen such things?
So, yeah, they built a temple and they're
Yep.
doing temple stuff at the place that Enoch ascended to heaven. And this is where it gets into it's weird, but it's also kind of fun. Methuselah consecrates his grandson Ner, who is a brother of Noah, a younger brother, as the priest to succeed him. And Ner's wife was old and barren, and she hasn't had any children. But then they get a promise from the Lord that she'll conceive a miraculous conception, and it's Melchizedek.
Interesting.
Yeah. And so who knows whether this is, does this predate Christ or is this like stuff like, okay, for example, this is Second Enoch, right? So this is Slavonic Enoch. It was discovered in the 7th or 8th century, or it was discovered in some catacombs or monastery or whatever in Eastern Christianity, Eastern Europe. It dates to about 7th or 8th century. I don't know when it was discovered. Way later than that. And so they're like, is this just spurious or whatever? But they found that Christians, Coptic Christians in Alexandria, Egypt, had Greek fragments of it.
Really?
Yeah, so it goes back actually at least to first century AD.
Ooh.
Second Enoch does. But we don't know, does it start out as a Christian text or does it start out as a Jewish text that Christians in Alexandria then adopted? And then, like, do Jews then co opt it back?
Right.
Like how much bleeding through is
Yeah.
there? We don't know.
Yeah, and then that becomes problematic because you're like, okay, because look, I don't think anyone just takes it and leaves it, right?
No,
Somebody's
there,
making
people are always
notes and
playing with it.
commentary, and if it bleeds back through that,
But yeah,
yeah,
but Melchizedek being born of a miraculous conception to a priest so
now
it's a synergy of John the Baptist and
in
Christ
Christ, yep.
right there. And so but you get into weird problems. Okay, now Melchizedek's born before the flood. And so how does he get preserved or whatever? And so Michael the archangel actually goes and like translates him and brings him to heaven. And then after the flood, Michael brings Melchizedek back down
Okay.
in this story, right? The Lord sends Michael to retrieve Melchizedek, preserve him in the heavenly Eden, that he may be a priest of priests forever, and I will consecrate him and will appoint him over the people, being made greatly holy, and I will establish another race. And Melchizedek shall be the chief of the priests in that family, just as Seth is to me in this family.
Ooh.
And so, yeah, Melchizedek was serving in the temple uh, that Methuselah made until the flood, and then gets translated and brought back down. Uh, let's see. We kind of touched on that a little bit. We'll read that. In Third Enoch, we alluded to this, but we'll just quote it. Rabbi Ishmael said, I asked Metatron and said to him, why art thou called by the name of thy creator, by 70 names? Thou art greater than all the princes, higher than all the angels, beloved more than all the servants, honored above all the mighty ones in kingship, greatness, and glory. Why do they call you youth in the high heavens? And it says lad in other places too.
Right.
He answered and said to me, because I am Enoch, the son of Jared.
Okay.
So, anyways, just
Yep.
that fits with Joseph Smith and the lad thing.
Yep.
I'm put a lad. Yeah, in Third Enoch, Metatron takes the Torah out of one of the heavenly storehouses and gives it to Moses. I don't have a reference, but that is in that one for sure, is where that comes from. And that is super interesting that they do that. That rabbi, so if that's Rabbi Ishmael saying that Metatron uh, brought out the Torah, it is in a way circumventing the Moses story, but it's at a time where the temple's already gone. Anyway, that's just interesting to ruminate on. Hugh Nibley, maybe we'll end with him. This is a quote from Vestments, which I believe is in Temple and Cosmos. Enoch says, I was clothed upon with glory, therefore I could stand in the presence of God. Otherwise he could not. It is the garments that gives confidence in the presence of God. One does not feel too exposed. That garment is the garment that awaits us above, the official garment of heaven, the garment of divinity. So as Enoch says, I was clothed upon with glory and saw the Lord, just as Moses saw him face to face, and the glory of God was upon Moses, therefore Moses could endure his presence. In Second Enoch, discovered in 1892, we read, The Lord spake to me with his own mouth. Take Enoch and remove his earthly garments and anoint him with holy oil and clothe him in his garments of glory. And I looked at myself, and I looked like one of the glorious ones, being no different from him in appearance. He is qualified now in the manner of initiation. He can go back and join them. because he has received a particular garment of glory.
Wow.
Anyways, that's all my notes.
Dude,
What do you got?
I've got no notes. You kidding me? I let everybody else do the hard work and then I just come on here and talk junk into a mic.
No, I just wanted to hear your closing remarks.
I got a closing question for you.
Sure.
What's the big takeaway from Enoch?
Well, I think it's interesting to tie all that we've learned back to the beginning with the name. It means initiated, inaugurated, dedicated, consecrated. Um, and we see, I actually, I'm seeing more temple stuff in it than I was even as I was compiling it. But
Mm-hmm.
that that whole theme is consistent throughout, and we see in ourselves, we're told in the temple to consider ourselves as if we were Adam and Eve.
Right.
But in a sense, we're also like Rabbi Ishmael, the Enoch going through the same thing,
Right.
hopefully, to our exaltation.
Right. Right. Absolutely. I think for me, Enoch is expansive in its
Well, it's huge, dude.
in its application and in its meaning, right? Because while certainly the temple stuff is amazing, you can't quote that enough. When you start doing what you did and taking apart all of this, and you start seeing that Enoch plays a far bigger role in the ancient prophets.
Yeah, like Samuel and Abinadi.
Yes.
Christ.
And then you see the breadth at which these books cover, right? I mean, as we just pointed out, everything from testifying of the Book of Mormon, temple stuff, dealing with abortion. I mean, it's expansive.
A higher priesthood than the priesthood given to children of Israel at the time of Moses.
Yes, it's expansive, right? And Enoch is fascinating to me because it's pre-Jewish, right? I mean, that's the thing that's amazing, is that it goes even before the Hebrew nation. It is before all of that. And I love learning about the Hebrews, right? I feel like there's a lot there. But Enoch predates that. And by doing so, provides a lot of connections clear back to Adam, more so than we have in any other book. And coupled with Joseph Smith, it just paints a picture that is hard to deny. It testifies of Joseph Smith's role, testifies of Christ's role, testifies of the temple. You go down the list, and it can't be overstated.
I don't want to get too weird here, but it's something that was pointed out in a way by a non-Mormon scholar that I found profoundly interesting. I don't agree with all that he said, but he said how it seems that even Joseph Smith felt maybe a kinship with Enoch.
Yes.
Himself, being called as a young boy. He's shown heavenly things. He's being given books of things that have been recorded from the fathers all the way down, as well as having his own experiences. And he, at least in our circles, he has attained a certain form of deification, just like Enoch did.
Absolutely. And his mission is similar in a lot of ways, right? I mean, Joseph wasn't necessarily too concerned with churches as we think of them today as structures, right? He was into building communities. And if you look at Enoch, that's what he did. And I don't think that Enoch's importance can be overstated. It needs to be approached with some caution, right? Like we talked about earlier. But there's too many fruits to just ignore it. And I think that's really what we come down to. We do ourselves a disservice as Mormons when we want to just shelve it.
No, Hugh Nibley was all about that. He's like, why aren't we paying attention to more of this Enoch stuff? Because we were promised that all these books would come forth, and his whole thing was, if we don't take advantage of it, we're going to have what we have taken away from us.
Absolutely.
And we see that. We see that with we're living in that.
Absolutely.
We're living in a point where the temple liturgy is being butchered.
Right.
The temple liturgy restored by Joseph Smith and perpetuated by Brigham Young and formalized by Brigham Young is being absolutely butchered and aborted itself.
Right.
Um, we're seeing as Nephi or Alma says that to them that harden their hearts against the truth, the portion that was revealed to them will be taken away.
Absolutely. Dude, good stuff. As always, if anybody wants the link to the class, they can reach out to me or they can find Michael on Facebook and reach out for that. Dude, what's next month?
Noah,
Nice.
Noah, and maybe the Tower of Babel. I don't know.
I like it.
We'll have to see.
I like it.
I'm not that far yet.
That's all right. It's all right. You seem to put these together with resounding speed and accuracy. So,
Thank you.
but anyway, awesome. All right. Well, dude, we'll see you next time. Bye, everybody.